Good to go.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the May Marine Fish Advisory Commission meeting. I'm Ray Kane, Chair, and I'm going to call this meeting to order. Introductions and announcements. I have none, other than this is another webinar meeting. I know a number of commissioners have asked that we do in-person meetings, so I know in June we'll be doing an in-person meeting in Gloucester. So let's move on. Let's review the May 24 business meeting agenda.
Mr. Chair, can we do the roll call attendance?
Roll call attendance. I'm sorry, Jared. Okay, call it out.
Bill Amaru.
Present.
Bill Doyle.
Here.
Chris McGuire.
Good morning, I'm here.
Khalil Bogdan.
Present.
Ray Kane.
Here.
Mike Peardnock.
Here.
Shelley Edmondson. Tim Brady.
Tim Brady's here.
Sookie Sawyer. All right, we have 8 out of the 9 members attended. Sookie is absent at present.
Thank you, Jared. So let's review the May 24 meeting agenda. Would anybody like to amend it or add something to it that they don't see on the agenda?
Not seeing any hands raised, Mr. Chair.
Then the agenda is accepted as is. Review and approval of the April 24 draft business meeting minutes. Any edits, changes, thoughts?
Good morning, Ray. I got one.
Suki, good morning. You're with us. Good morning.
Yeah. After following the discussion about the new lobster rules at the last meeting, there was a conversation with Dan about postponing implementation of it if Maine and them didn't go along with it, but it wasn't in the minutes.
I'll look back at that, Sookie. I thought I had captured that.
Okay, I didn't see it, Jared. So yeah, that'd be good. Okay.
Thank you, Suki. So how do we go about this, Jared? Are you gonna, before we can approve it?
Yeah, we'll have to bring these back to a vote in June.
I think it is in the minutes, actually.
You know where, Shelley, or?
Let me look.
Thank you.
Hold on. Sorry. Yeah, I think it's on page 13.
Page 13,
Oh,
Jared?
no, sorry, page 6 of
Page 6, Jared?
first
Yeah,
paragraph.
I just was able to pull up a copy now. Let's see, on page 6.
In paragraph.
First paragraph. It says Dan stated.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
However, he would not rule out the use of his emergency authority to rescind these rules if it appears Massachusetts is the only state that should implement them and the others opt for non-compliance.
Suki,
Okay, my mistake, Ray. Sorry about that.
you good with that?
Yeah, I'm good. Yep, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, if there's no other edits, I need a motion with a second.
I'll make the motion, Ray.
Thank you, Shelley.
I'll second.
And who was that? Bill Amaru. Thank you, Bill.
You're welcome.
We'll call the roll.
Roll call.
Bill Amaru,
Yes.
Bill Doyle,
Yes.
Chris McGuire,
Yes.
Khalil Bogdan,
Yes.
Mike Peardnock. Mike Peardnock.
Yes.
Shelley Edmondson,
Yes.
Sookie Sawyer,
Yes.
Tim Brady.
Yes.
Passes unanimously, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Moving on, I would like to thank everybody for attending the meeting. Once again, I just keep repeating myself. like old news to all of you, but I'm so thankful that you're also attentive to these meetings and to the public hearings. I know in past administrations, we did not have the commission attendance that we have with this current administration, meaning the director, not the governor's office. I'm just talking about DMF staff. I mean, it's blown, it's such a change. Other than that, I hope you're all enjoying that 80, 90-degree weather that they're talking about in Boston and, west of the bridges. It's like 60 degrees here. I think that's the warmest it's going to get on Cape Cod, at least down the East End. So enjoy the 2 summer days. I'm going to turn this over to law enforcement. I presume this is Lieutenant Bass.
I believe Lieutenant
Ray?
Bass is unavailable to make the meeting today. Lieutenant Colonel, are you on?
Mr. Chairman, you're stuck with me this morning.
Are you still with us, Pat? I mean, I don't see you at ASMFC anymore.
No, there's a new representative at AF. Major Baker goes to those meetings.
Yeah, I got some noise in the background, Pat.
I'm actually doing an interview with a newspaper right now, so I'm gonna stick the phone in the desk and talk to you guys really quick.
Yeah.
So talking to the guys and looking at the figures, I think we may be on a record pace this year for striped bass violations. So far this season, we've written close to 70 citations, and we've seized probably a good couple of 100 pounds, or a good couple of 100 pounds of fish that we've donated to the food pantries. Sadly, none of the fish that we've taken was revivable, so that was our only course of action. We're finding that of the citations that we've written, none of the people were holders of commercial striper licenses. So what we're seeing so far is that it's definitely all recreational fishermen. And I think our biggest concern, and this was a discussion with the Coastal Command staff, is that we're not seeing half of what may be occurring. And I'll tell you, most of these citations that we've written are taking place between 11 at night and 4 in the morning. So that's where we are. It looks to be an interesting season.
So,
and that's all I have, Mr. Chair.
any questions for Lieutenant Colonel Moran?
Director McKiernan.
Hey, Pat, I saw the Facebook post. I think it was the Merrimack River area. Can you make any comment as to the regions of the state where you're seeing?
Well, that's a good point. But this is, and I'll tell you that it's a lot of that area, the Lawrence area, Merrimack River, but that's because we have a lot of nighttime patrols up there. We're not seeing those nighttime patrols yet down this way. So yeah, you're right, Dan. It's mostly up in the Lawrence, Springfield area. We're chasing. We've got people running from us, and once we tackle them and get them on the ground, we're finding all kinds of fentanyl in their pockets. So it goes way beyond just striped bass violations. It's obviously you don't want to be out there by yourself at night kind of situation. So
okay, thank you.
Thank you, Pat. I have a question. So where do we go from here if these are recreational fishermen who buy, I presume they bought saltwater licenses, Pat?
And you know what? That's a good point, Ray, because we have not written up one citation for no saltwater fishing license.
So where does this go from here? To an adjudicatory process? Or,
I mean, that could, but that's going to take up a lot of DMF's time and the adjudicatory procedures. I mean, these are, I mean, they've got licenses, and the violations run the gauntlet from. I think most of them are oversized, so they're over the maximum recreational limit, and over the limit.
Yeah, in the past, we have started administrative actions on private recreational angler permits. The real teeth of an adjudicatory process, though, is when the permit is limited entry and that permit's permanently retired if it's suspended or revoked. There's less teeth in it when you do it on either an open entry commercial permit or on a recreational permit, because there's ways to game the system that you don't have access to when it's a open access permit or a limited access permit rather.
That's very true, and we could tie Jared up for months and months with recreational saltwater permits, but that if they're suspended, they're going to fish anyway. So, until they're caught again, it's the price of doing business.
Bill Amaru?
Thank you. Oh, this is disturbing. You've just answered some of the aspects of the question I was going to ask, which was, these don't sound like recreational fishermen to me, especially the hours they keep. Gives the recreational sector a bad name, and it's hurting our efforts to conserve and make sure that this species is around again for both commercial and recreational. So what I'm hearing here is these are people that are recreational permit holders that intend to do a lot more with their fish than probably barbecue it and grill it on the back grill.
Well, let me say, Bill, that so far we have focused our attention and our nighttime patrols on those areas. We've not done that so far, South Shore, South Coastal areas. So
I'll bet it's happening all over, to tell you the
I'm
truth.
sure it is. And that's why I mentioned, a discussion with my command staff, my coastal command staff, is that we're probably not seeing, half of the violations that are occurring. So,
well, maybe what we could do is recommend that the director issue a letter to the recreational sector advising that violations of the new rules, or any of the rules, that will result in penalties that heretofore have not necessarily been applied, but in the future, because of the dire situation that we find ourselves in, will be expanded. Something like that. I mean, we got to do something besides just talk about it here at a meeting.
and Dan brought up a good point, the demographics of where most of these violations are occurring, and it's I mean, it's obvious that these people, they don't care, and they're just going to continue to do it until they're in handcuffs and sitting in a cell somewhere. But I mean, that's what we're facing, and I don't really know how you deal with it. I don't think a strict letter to the recreational sector is going to do much for these certain people that we're dealing with.
so, which leads me to another question, Pat, and you should be able to answer this. How is the funding? I mean, we've been talking about funding enforcement for years to get more boots on the ground.
Yeah.
Can you give us an update on that?
No, and listen, I every time we have these meetings, I want to jump on and thank you and the commission for what you do to get us more bodies. I truly appreciate that, and we all do at MEP. Ray, you know as well as I do, there's a million spots you can go striper fishing in this state. Doesn't matter how many EPOs you have, you can't cover them all.
No, I understand that, Pat, but my question is, Are we getting funding from the current administration?
We are currently have from, we were allotted 15 bodies under Colonel Santos. We currently have that, the 15th person just starting the academy right now. So we're, you know, and unfortunately, as much as I'm a proponent for filling coastal districts, I've got to look at big picture in this seat, and I've got to think of my inland brethren too, who are shorthanded. So I'll tell you, out of that 15 people, probably 9 went to inland bureaus, and 3 to the coastal bureau. So I mean, you know, we got 15 bodies, but did it help the coast much? Not really.
Okay, which begs for the question, with attrition, are we just maintaining the 130 or 35 officers?
No, we don't have that many. We're at 105 right now, which is our highest in many years.
So it is on an upward tick.
It is, and again, but we have attrition. We've got a lot of officers retiring this year, myself included, and um, there are no bodies in the system. So we've got to wait till EEA says, "Yep, we'll give you." You know, even if we ask for 15, if we get 5, we're happy. So that request is out there for more bodies. So far, nothing heard, but we keep on trying.
So I guess this would be my question to Jared or Dan. Is it time, I think annually, the commission signs off on a letter. We send a letter to the EPA asking for funding. Is it that time of the year, Jared?
I mean, we
Well,
haven't done it annually. I don't think we've done it in the past couple of years, but in the past we have. I have crafted a letter for the commission to review. If that's something you want to instruct me to do for the next meeting, Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to revive, dust off that old letter and work with the lieutenant colonel to update it for your review at the June meeting, and we can send it on to EEA at that time.
so
Okay, I heard Dan gasping. So Dan, have you got something to say?
No, yeah, I'm with Jared. It's a new secretary, it's a new administration. Like Jared said, we can refresh it with the latest statistics of the status of MEP. And, they usually put together the budgets in the late summer, early fall for next year. And it's never too early to bring the concerns of this commission to the attention of the administration that you'd like to see a robust mass environmental police force.
Thank you, Dan. So do I have consensus from my commission members on this that Jared will dust off the old letter and revitalize a new letter, and then we can look at it at the June meeting in Gloucester and move forward? Have I got consensus, or do I
Do
need?
you want me to call a roll on that, or do you want to
Please,
do that by
please,
unanimous
yes,
consent?
yes,
Call the
please.
roll. All right, Bill Amaru,
Yes.
Bill Doyle,
Yes.
Chris McGuire,
Yes.
Khalil Bogdan,
Yes.
Mike Pearnock,
Yes.
Shelley Edmondson,
Yes.
Suki Sawyer. Suki,
Yeah.
Tim
Yes.
Brady.
Yes.
Okay.
And Tim
Sure.
Brady, yes.
Thank you all. Pat,
All
have
right,
you got
Mr. Chair, I'll draft that up for a vote at the June meeting.
Thank you very much, Jared.
All right.
Any questions for
Yeah, we have 2 more hands raised. Mike Pearnock.
Really
Next
quickly,
up.
I just want to say, Mr. Chairman, I want to say thank you on behalf of the environmental police to you and everybody for moving forward with this. It's much appreciated.
Well, I think the commission members might enjoy one of those summer hats from your office.
You got to get me before August 31st, or you're out of luck.
Okay, well, I'm sure they'd all be proud to wear it. It's a nice summer hat. Okay, any questions? And Jared, you said you had two hands up. Question?
Yeah, Mike Piernock's next in the queue.
Michael, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Colonel Moran. I do have a question, because you alluded to the fact that there's drug transactions or so on going out there. Are these individuals then selling the striped bass because the price per pound is such that whenever there's an opportunity for cartels to do such, maybe that's the road they're going down. I just returned from highly migratory species advisory panel meetings where the past 4 or 5 years, the Mexican cartels now control the fishery that illegally comes into U.S. waters, and they keep getting arrested and sent back, and they keep coming into our area, and nothing is really done about it. So my question is then, are these, you kind of alluded to the fact, if I heard you right, that these are individuals from selling drugs or so on. They're catching these fish. Not sure what they're doing with them, but you seem to infer that they're selling them, which would make sense if the drug cartels are also controlling that, because the price per pound is such that it's high. So whether they're recreational or improperly documented commercial fishers, this is a problem at both ends that hopefully can be addressed. Not sure how it can be addressed. Maybe outreach to inform the recreational commercial community of what's taking place and to report such to hopefully avoid it. Because in my eyes, Dan McKiernan made a point. This could be a regional issue. There's always some sort of poaching at all sectors. And I still have to hope that that's not something that's rampant throughout our entire state, and it's just relatively localized in certain areas. So do you have any response to what you really think is behind this? Thank you.
I don't want to offer an opinion because we haven't really taken a deep dive into that question. And I don't think I said selling drugs. I think I said possessing drugs. So some of the people that we've contacted, yes, have been in possession of fentanyl, heroin, cocaine. I don't think in amounts that equals sale. But again, they've been arrested for having outstanding warrants, and you just add the fisheries charges to that. Again, Mike, I haven't done a deep dive into that, but again, our focus has been focused on that area of the state because it's traditionally just full of problems, and we've actually, the officers are so concerned about this that they're working these unusual hours to try and combat this problem. I haven't done a deep dive into it, but I can certainly look into something like that.
Yeah, if I could, Pat, Mike brought up a good point, and I can remember years ago, was Joint Venture Enforcement, JVE or JEV. Yeah, they had that huge bust down in Virginia for striped bass. It was millions of pounds, but this could be a prelude, and maybe it's time to call in the federal.
Well, unfortunately, the JEA contract only covers striped bass at sea. It doesn't cover
state waters.
It doesn't cover, no, it covers state waters. It just doesn't cover land-based fishing. So we've been using a lot of division overtime to get this done. But to me, it's worth it. It's a problem that we have to deal with, and we're dealing with it the best way that we can. So,
well, thank you, Pat. That's similar to the roundtable at ASMFC. Every commission member down there is working to protect the species, and hopefully we'll see a rebound. But I don't want to get into climate change and everything else, but you know, we're working, we're up against it with this particular species, so I want to thank enforcement.
No, and I'll sit here and tell you that my officers are just committed as I am to the poaching issues. And you know, if I'm asking them for volunteers, to nobody wants to work, you know, at 1 a.m, but that's where the violations are. That's where the problems are, is you know, 10 o'clock to 4 a.m. So that's when you have to work.
Jared, you had somebody else's hand up?
Yeah, we got Khalil Bogdan.
Khalil, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Jared. A quick question. This is an immediate issue problem that we're facing. Obviously, we don't have the manpower to patrol. Is it possible, and this is easier, probably easier asked than actually accomplished, but is it possible to have some of the inland officers on a, and this is probably going to be just a temporary basis, but pull some of the inland officers in to work with the marine sector officers to help in the immediate future to patrol and to try to get this, you know, in hand?
That happens up in the Merrimack River. It's joint coastal and inland because they border each other. But again, my inland bureaus are just as busy with, you know, bear calls, moose calls, deer calls. That stuff never ends. The bear are all awake right now and raising havoc throughout the Commonwealth, and same with the moose. So you know, they've got their priorities too, Khalil. So
All right, thank you. One last question. The equipment that they're using, circle hooks, non-circle hooks, treble hooks.
you know,
Let
surprisingly,
let me finish it. And once they're arrested, is their equipment confiscated?
yes, it is confiscated until a court hearing. But surprisingly, everything's legal. They have saltwater fishing licenses. They're for the most part using circle hooks. It's just, you know, the garbage bags that they carry with them are being put to good use. So, you know, 90% of the violations are for over the limit, and probably the other 90% is oversized. So
Thank
they're
you
not
very much.
they're not pulling back the smaller ones, the bigger ones, I meant.
Thank you, Khalil. Questions for law enforcement? Any
Bill
other?
Ammer.
Bill, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I can't say too much more. Everything has been said that we can say at this time, I believe, on this subject. I just want to add that I believe strongly along the lines that Mike Piernock brought out. And I think that this is evidence, especially the fact that they're in line with so many of the other rules and regulations of a well thought out and probably organized fishery that's taking place illegally in our state. And we need to do something about it, because it's going to start with this fishery and then it's going to spread to others, because there's going to be word that'll get out into the open market of these kinds of people that Massachusetts is a mark, and they can move in this direction and fish for God knows what else illegally, and bring all the other aspects of their lifestyles along with them, which we don't want in our fishery. Those are my comments, and I hope we can do something in the future.
Thank you, Bill. Any other hands, Jared?
None, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Pat. So hopefully we'll have a letter at our meeting in June, Pat, that we'll be able to send to the EPA or the governor's office. So thank you for your time, Pat.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it.
So Jared, is the commissioner with us today?
No, he is not.
Okay, Dan, you have the floor. Director Dan McKee.
All right. Thank you, Raymond. I just have a couple of brief comments. First, we're making preparations for the June 18th MFAC meeting. It's going to be held at the Salem Cat Cove Lab. Similar to the way we held our summer meeting 2 summers ago. The facility's a little tight for a full meeting and any audience, so we're actually going to erect a tent, and then have a little bit of a social gathering in the afternoon after the meeting over on Winter Island, which is about 200 yards away or 300 yards away. And we hope that the commission members would attend both of those. In the second session, that's going to give us a chance to roast and toast Mike Armstrong on June 18th. June 19th is a federal and state holiday, so it gives us a chance to maybe stay up a little later than we would on a normal school night. The other thing I want to mention is there's a lot of meetings being scheduled on offshore wind, specifically the Gulf of Maine Offshore Wind Task Force. Intergovernmental Task Force is scheduling a meeting for May 31st in Plymouth. And this is primarily a government meeting, but many of the industry members do attend. And it's the 3 states of Maine, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts, and their various agencies getting together and talking about offshore wind energy, not just from a fisheries perspective, but from an overall perspective, such as, demand and infrastructure, the grid. And then, of course, it's going to feature BOEM talking about their proposed sale notice. And that's going to be a lengthy presentation because they've identified 8 areas within those the larger wind energy areas that were finalized. They proposed 8 different leases, and they're looking for feedback on that and how to give those out. Offshore wind is probably not going to be seen in the Gulf of Maine for at least a decade, but decades come and go quick. And that technology is very much in development, and it's hard for us to envision that, but it's needless to say, it's likely that fishing is going to be impacted, especially within the array of turbines in the Gulf of Maine if they're floating, because of all the cabling that will be needed to keep the floating platforms in place and the inter-array cables, which are expected to be on the water column. So any other comments I want to make, I'll just make during the normal meeting based on our regular business, but I can take any questions on either of those 2 if the commission wants to pose them to me.
Questions for Director Dan McKiernan?
Bill Amaru?
Bill, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dan, I'm very glad that you brought it up in terms of the fisheries interacting with the proposed and some already effective wind energy platforms. I sent an email to you and to a number of other members of the commission this morning based on my knowledge of how the squid fishery here in Massachusetts is progressing so far this year, and it's a total disaster. And I'm not saying that there's necessarily a connection between the cables that are now running across the bottom that these squid come in from the southwest, but what we need to do, what I propose, is that we keep an eye on the stock results of our annual analysis that we do anyway, with an eye towards how this period of time, starting this year, going forward, may affect the results of our analysis. Because I personally believe that there's going to be, and may already have been, some impacts on our fisheries from what's happening out at sea. And if that's the case, and we see major disruptions and patterns, I think we have to be able to say that we've got evidence that it may be being caused by this. So, scarce a actual project, dedicated to this. There just has to be an awareness from this point forward, 2024 forward, that there's a new player in the game, and it's not necessarily overfishing. It could be environmental, it could be man-made, but we just have to be aware of it.
Yeah, I appreciate
yes.
that, Bill. As you know, I cut my teeth early in my career studying the squid fishery, and it always would peak around the second and third weeks of May. But what turns that fishery off like nothing is northeast and easterly winds. And so obviously we just suffered that over the weekend, and now here comes the southwest wind. So if there is any optimism for the season to be salvaged, it would be in the next week to 10 days that the switch has flipped and things are different. But I take your point, and it's an important one.
Well, thank you.
Any other questions for the director?
Not seeing any, Mr. Chair.
I have one. Dan, down at ASMSC, another commission member came up to me and told me about a 3 or 4 day longfin squid meeting that they had, and he was telling me what a fantastic event it was, and that the offshore boats, being out the Elix squid, they've decimated that stock, are going to pursue the longfin. I was wondering if any DMF staff had attended that, namely Brad Schottlemeyer, because he was the one who did the report when we had this issue with Nantucket, and you remember that issue.
Yeah. Yeah, Ray.
He was funded, so I was wondering if you had sent anybody from your staff to that.
Yeah, no, I had not heard of that event, and so I don't believe any of our staff attended.
Okay, thank you. Questions for the director?
Not seeing any.
Thank you, Jared. Let's move along. Action items, recreational fishing limits for black sea bass, scup, and summer flounder. I presume Nicola's gonna deal with this?
Yeah, let me just open up the conversation. By way of background, whenever we do emergency regulations, and why do we do emergency regulations? We do it because typically it's time constraints. I mean, in the old days, emergency regulations were mainly required because you had an unexpected occurrence. But these days, with the slowness of a lot of regulatory processes, we have in our working with other management entities such as the Mid-Atlantic Council and the ASMFC. We come home with these mandates that where we're just not capable of having a full rulemaking process, which Jared will tell us takes 4 to 6 months, and 4 is exceptionally fast. So what we try to do is to get your consensus before we use emergency authority, so that when we come back to enact a rule as final, you've already given it some thought, and you wouldn't reverse your views and have us do something different. So that's what today's about. If you recall, we had we called a scoping meeting because we're trying to get the input of the fishery participants for the summer flounder, scup, sea bass, also for striped bass. We try to get that in advance. We come back to you with a loose proposal, it's or maybe even semi-formal, and we ask for consensus for us to use that authority. And by you folks agreeing at that time, it doesn't eliminate your opportunity to change your mind, but we do everything we can to avoid that, because, as you know, the fishing season has begun or is on the verge of beginning, and part of the problem of fisheries management is outreach and education and informing the users about what the rules are, and if they're changing every year, you need as much time as you can get. So Nicola can go over the some of these details, some of which you've seen before. Then the second issue we're going to talk about is striped bass, where we had a hearing as recently as last night. That's kind of late breaking stuff that we're going to have a good substantive discussion about. And then there's the pesky codfish and haddock rules that the New England Council always seems to be so delayed on, and that's a perpetual problem for us. So Nicola, take it away on fluke, scup, and black sea bass. And I think you all know that Nicola is my proxy at ASMFC on these 3 species, which means she also attends the Mid-Atlantic Council meetings when they deal with this as a jointly managed species.
Morning, Nicola.
Good morning, Greg. Good morning to everyone. I'll just give a quick summary of what you're seeing on the slide here, but the recommendation is to adopt the final regulations for fluke scup and sea bass that's consistent with the emergency regulations. As Dan said, they're already in place for two of the species and about to open with the fluke season on May 24th. So per the interstate and Mid-Atlantic and ASMFC requirements, we were looking at a 28% reduction for summer flounder, a 10% reduction for scup, and status quo harvest for black sea bass. Based on the public comment that we received in scoping, we moved ahead with summer flounder and scup reductions, mostly by increasing the minimum sizes for those species in the vessel-based modes, both private vessel and for hire vessel. We've seen, increased ability here to keep the size limits lower on the shore to reflect the size availability of fish at the shore side. So specific to summer flounder, a 1-inch increase to 17.5 inches in the vessel-based modes nearly achieved the 28% reduction. And we just tweaked the season to make sure that it still included the Memorial Day weekend and had to take out 9 days to reach that target. With scup, a 1/2-inch size increase from 10.5 to 11 inches for the vessel-based modes was enough as in a region of Mass, Rhode Island, Connecticut, and New York to achieve the 10% reduction. And then with sea bass, we just adjusted the season in a manner that was not projected to increase harvest. So that would still open on the 3rd Saturday in May, which was this past weekend. There was very limited comment on these measures, not surprisingly, given that we did the scoping meeting earlier. There was one comment received last night that reflected on, desire to keep the regulations as uniform as possible across the modes. That was, more about the for hire versus private angler modes as opposed to the shore differential, I think. And then there was one comment in writing that spoke, as we've heard in the past, about, a preference for a longer season in the black sea bass fishery. We'll, take that comment to heart, of course, for next year when we look at what might be coming down the line for black sea bass. The rules for black sea bass are just for a year, and for summer flounder and scup, they're expected to be for 2 years. I'm happy to answer any questions that there may be about these measures, but might not be any.
Questions for Nicola? Jared?
Mike Piernock?
Michael, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Nicola. And the recreational community appreciates the shoreside summer flounder change to the size as a result of the fact that there's just smaller fish around for them. So that's greatly appreciated by the public. The question for you, Dan just mentioned it, the easterly winds have really destroyed this past weekend, May 18th, for black sea bass, and they're probably going to arrive any minute in Buzzards Bay, but reports elsewhere at Vineyard Sound, they're out there. The fact that the effort and the catch is going to go down because this past weekend few were caught and landed, and that it is through September 3rd. Just for clarity, because I'm getting mixed up whether between councils, commissions, and so on. If we're under, is there any carryover for us next year?
No, there's not that type of either, in-season management for this year, such as to, extend the season past September 3rd if fishing is slower in the beginning. And the rules for next year, we really don't have an allocation. So if there's nothing that we're exactly under that could be rolled over in that sense of like a commercial quota, because as you know, these are not, hard quota managed species on the recreational side.
So a question, Nicola, that's a coastal allocation, right, for recreational?
There is a overall sector allocation between the commercial and recreational fisheries, yes, but there are not state-by-state allocations per se of the recreational harvest limit.
Thank you. Michael?
Okay, thank you.
You good, Michael? Any other
Yes.
hands for
Thank you.
Nicholas? Any other hands, Jared?
Not seeing any, Mr. Chair.
So, are we gonna move forward with a motion on this? Or we don't need to, do we?
No, we need a motion and that followed by a roll call vote.
Okay, we do need a motion, so who's willing to make the motion on this recommendation?
I'll make the motion to approve.
Thank you, I need a second.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Roll call, Jared?
Bill Amaru. Bill Amaru. Bill Doyle.
Yes.
Chris McGuire.
Yes.
Leo Bogdan.
Yes,
Mike Peardnock.
Yes.
Shelley Edmondson.
Yes.
Suki Sawyer.
Yes.
Tim Brady.
Yes.
Yes, sorry, Jared, I had some trouble with the button. Yes.
Okay, Bill. Motion passes unanimously, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Moving along, recreational filleting of striped bass.
So Raymond, there's an email that went out as recently as last night with a final recommendation on this. And I want to thank the commission members who attended last night's hearing and also the staff on this call, as well as some of the other recreational fishing, specialists on staff that have tried to help us with this. This is an interesting one. Once upon a time, our regulations were more clear. Even though I've been in the regulation game for a long time, a few decades here, I honestly can't recall when the language about the domicile was dropped, but there's been some confusion about the for hire, the private anglers' ability to fillet and when in the act of fishing or after the act of fishing or all the way home, and what does an angler do with a big carcass. So we've been trying to clarify this as part of this rule. This rule was precipitated by the ASMFC addendum requirements that requires us to retain racks, especially in the for hire sector, for enforcement purposes. So I'm gonna, with that as background, I want to have Nicola, walk us through this, with reference to, what we're required to do at ASMFC, through ASMFC, and where our discretion is, and also how other states are dealing with that. So Nicola, why don't you, and start off, and Jared, I know you've done a lot of work on this as well.
Nicola, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. So as you can see on the screen, and Dan mentioned, Addendum 2, which implemented the commercial quota cut, maintained the 20 to 31-inch recreational slot limit. It had this additional measure in it that we did have to make a rule change for, in order to adopt new kind of minimum requirements for states that allow filleting in the recreational fishery. These requirements are meant to improve compliance and enforcement with the recreational limits, specifically for states that allow filleting in across the recreational fishery or in just one mode, as we have. There is a new rack retention requirement and a requirement that no more than 2 fillets, come off of a fish and be possessed. So because of that May 1st implementation deadline, we went through emergency rulemaking for this. We did hold a scoping meeting with the for-hire industry to discuss the rack retention element for their allowance. We've had a long-standing allowance that says that the captain and crew aboard for-hire vessels can fillet striped bass for their customers while they're at sea, provided there's no more than 2 fillets and the skin is left on the fillet. Other than that, our rule stated that recreational fishers shall not mutilate any striped bass in a manner that prevents the accurate measurement of the fish. So it's that element that has been interpreted in different ways. DMF's interpretation or intent was that filleting aboard a private vessel or, on the shore while fishing, is not allowed, that fish should be landed and leaving the shore whole, other than, evisceration or other cleaning, although it doesn't really say that. So we sought to clean that up in the emergency rule, make it more clear as to when processing is allowed, and also clarify that we didn't mean in the private mode that a fish could be filleted and the rack kept in order to get that measurement of fish. And then the other part was that for the for-hire allowance, in order to keep that exemption in there, we needed to adopt the rack retention piece. And the scoping meeting that we had with the for-hire industry was very helpful in guiding us towards adopting some language for that piece. And our hearing last night and the comment was more directed about how we would kind of finesse the private vessel and shore allowance or requirements. So if you go to the next slide. We are, based on the comment that we've received and kind of the flexibility that we have, we are changing the recommendation is a change from what we implemented in the emergency rules, specific to the private vessel and shore mode requirement. So the recommendation is to require that recreationally harvest striped bass remain whole with the head and tail intact until the fisher reaches their residence, except that a fish could be eviscerated, bled, and descaled while at sea or shoreside. It can be filleted for immediate consumption after the conclusion of fishing, including the storage of gear. That part was in the emergency rule. The third part here is what is changing from the emergency rule, though. We are recommending that filleting may occur shoreside after the conclusion of vessel or shore-based fishing, including, the gear is stored, and provided that no more than 2 fillets are possessed, each with a minimum 2 square inch patch of skin being intact for identification, and that no additional fishing occurs once the possession of those fillets. That differs from the emergency rule, which stated that, basically the angler had to be kind of in their car and driving away from the site of fishing before they could fillet a fish. So largely it meant getting back to your domicile to fillet that fish. But in the comment, we heard concerns about wanting to put fillets on ice as quickly as possible for the quality of the meat, as well as concerns about not everyone having convenient or adequate disposal opportunities for a 28-inch rack when they get back to their house, or particularly if you were staying at short-term rental accommodations on a vacation, you might not have access to a way to dispose of those racks. So we are trying to kind of thread the needle between giving enforcement an opportunity to inspect catch, a reasonable window of time, but then also accommodate some shoreside filleting that would not make it overly burdensome to go fishing and really discourage people from fishing. The last part of the emergency recommendation is largely what we've already had in place for the for-hire allowance to fillet at sea, except that the racks have to be retained until the vessel is docked and the customers have departed, and then the racks themselves, can't be cut in two or anything done to them, so that the whole length of that fish couldn't be measured from it. So we did, based on industry input, go to a 2 square inch patch of skin remaining on each fillet as opposed to the whole skin, given that the rack is going to be possessed for that additional species identification. So all of this complies with Addendum 2. Again, it provides law enforcement with an opportunity to inspect the catch. in balance with allowing anglers some opportunity to fillet their fish shoreside, including at fillet stations, many of which are, supported by recreational license fees. We did hear some concerns that, being more clear that some shoreside filleting is allowed might lead to disposal of racks or racks accumulating and kind of a public nuisance issue with that. So we're certainly going to be mindful of that, monitor for issues, and can proceed with, angler education if it's needed about that type of issue. In regards to, what have other states done? I think that there is only one state that says you have to take the whole fish all the way back to the domicile before filleting can occur. Some states, it's just once it's landed, it can be filleted. So I think with this recommendation, we're kind of in the middle of, balancing law enforcement considerations and, placing too much burden on an angler to go fishing.
Questions for Nicola?
Mr. Chair, do you want to move for a motion on this before fielding
Yes,
questions?
yes,
or
I'm
comments?
sorry. Yes, by all means, let's have the motion on the board and then we'll have questions. So I need a motion, members.
Motion to approve.
Second, Suki.
Thank you, Suki. Who made the motion to approve?
Mike made it, Suki seconded
Michael
it.
Piernock made it. Thank you, Michael. Roll call vote.
Well, do we have questions and comments?
Yeah, questions and comments, even though this is more or less a done deal, if I'm not mistaken.
Bill Amber?
Bill, you're recognized. Bill?
Again, the button. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if the irony of this reaches the rest of the commission members, but this morning we discussed violations that are taking place in Striped Bass, and now we're talking about a management strategy, which I don't know if it's the right term, but it's borders on micromanagement to the nth degree. It's not that it's not that I disagree with it. I do agree with it. I just find that the irony is striking from the discussion we had this morning of others fishers who disregard the rules and regulations. I don't think this is going to have one bit of an impact on those people. And they probably represent a far greater aspect of mortality, illegal mortality, than anything that this will prevent from happening. But that still is stuck in my craw, that discussion this morning on enforcement.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
If I can come back to you, Bill, on this, we've been out of compliance with Addendum 2. I believe we're the only state that's been out of compliance, and we're trying to be in compliance with Addendum 2 with ASMFC. So I think DMF and the public, they've done a good job. I think Nicholas presented it well. This is the road we have to go down for now, and hopefully, I might as well put it out there. I believe Nicholas, this striped bass will be in her wheelhouse when Mike Armstrong retires. But after attending that ASGA seminar this past Friday, I would like to put it on the agenda at some time, Jared, that we start talking about taking photographs, because down there they did a presentation, and I know right now for today in this season, we're going down this road with this regulation, but in the future, hopefully we'll be able to photograph the fish according to people at ASGA. You can get length, weight, and girth of a fish, but that's a discussion down the road. But I would like to see it put on an upcoming meeting on the agenda down the road here. But that's the bottom line, Bill.
Yeah, I understand. I just hope that the intent of this is met by the actions of the industry. I don't know if it will be, but I hope it is successful.
Well, I wish you would listen into an ASMFC meeting on striped bass. There isn't a commissioner at the table who isn't trying to preserve the species, maintain the species. Hopefully, we'll get a good young of the year crop one of these years. I think we've had 5 bad years in a row. But, ASMFC, there isn't a meeting that I attend down there, and I attend every ASMFC meeting, that striped bass is not on the agenda. Striped bass to ASMFC is what codfish used to be to the New England Fishery Management Council or the State House, in the Senate. So, that's what I can say, Bill.
Yeah, thank you, Ray. I understand. Thank you.
So just to clarify, 2 points on this, that piece of discussion. We are currently in compliance with Addendum 2. We filed emergency regulations for May 1 to meet that compliance deadline. What we're doing now is coming back with a final recommendation that amends the emergency rule to accommodate to accommodate shoreside processing of fish after recreational fishing is done, based on public comment, and to give some more clarity to when and how fish may be processed upon the completion of recreational fishing. And Bill, I totally agree with your comment that this isn't going to change the behavior of poachers one iota. What we hope it does is allows our the rank and file folks who fish legally, who make up the bulk of our recreational fishery, to have a better understanding of where they can process fish, so that they're not forced to bring fish all the way back to their house to process them, and then have to deal with rack disposal and maybe decide not to fish because that burden is just too onerous.
All right, thank you. I appreciate that, Chair.
Thank you, Jared, for clarification.
If I can jump in, I know that Ray, you were referencing the fact that when Addendum 2 was adopted, Massachusetts was the only state that allowed filleting at sea without a rack retention requirement. So we were a bit of an outlier in that regard. And are making that correction in the emergency measures and in this ongoing measure. But yes, we were a bit of an outlier in that sense, in terms of not requiring racks to be retained for at-sea processing.
Thank you, Nicola. You're like the Britannica. That's why I enjoy sitting next to you at the table at ASMFC meetings. If I have any thoughts or questions, I always turn to you and go with your advice. Thank you very much.
Mike Peardnock?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Jared. Not to repeat what Bill said, and I agree with partially what Bill said, and Ray and Jared's response and Nicola's response. This is a good first step for those typical ethical recreational anglers to follow. And if we need outreach in the future to deal with the racks, that's a good thing. There's always going to be poaching, and I think you probably could look at what that historical percentage of poaching takes place, but that activity up in the Merrimack is not consistent with our typical. You have one's ethics and one's behavior dictated by one's culture or upbringing. My upbringing, I would follow this. Especially those 70 illegal fish caught up in Merrimack, I think that's the problem we're dealing with here. And I don't know whether it is disturbed because of the status of the striped bass fishery. But I'm fine with this, and I appreciate the work that everybody did to get this to this point with these proposed measures. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Jared?
Chris McGuire?
Chris, you're recognized.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I was sort of thinking about this with the earlier conversation as well. And, there are people who are going to do the wrong thing. But with all these emergency regulations, I'm curious to just hear a little bit about how the outreach happens from DMF and others. Like, how do we get the word out to people? Can DMF send an email to everyone who's purchased a saltwater license? Or
Yep,
I'm just
exactly
curious to
what we
hear a
did.
little bit more about that piece of it, because I know, I pay attention to this, and I know sometimes it's hard to keep track of it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chris. Jared?
Yeah, so I can speak to the outreach on our rulemaking generally and our recreational rulemaking. We have an online email system that we pay for, and we have folks can enroll on that on our website. We have about 100,000 subscribers. So we'll send that out for any advisory that we get out. So what anything that you might see come across your email, that's part of that. In addition, when we are doing things that we think necessitate greater outreach to our permit holders, we can upload email lists from our permit holder databases to reach all of those people, and we'll do that for both the for hire and private modes for these emergency rule changes. And then our staff, do meet with, fishing groups to further discuss that at the over the winter and during the outset of the season.
Jared, Ben Gahagan has his hand up. He
Yeah.
should speak to
Ben,
some
you're
of these issues
recognized.
too.
Thank you, Commissioners. In addition, the recreational fisheries program is going to be sending a welcome to 2024 fishing summary out to all our recreational and for hire license holders, and I'm happy to add something about this to that letter as well. And it'll be kind of through the same email process that Jared just outlined, and will also be highlighted on our social media. So hopefully we can, by having a little bit more of an informal dialogue going along with that formal advisory and letter type format, we can cover all the bases and get the most engagement possible with our stakeholders.
Ben, I have a question. So in this email format, what are there, like 180,000 recreational saltwater licenses in the state? The number's high. But I was wondering if there's some way you could implement a checkbox so that these people you're sending this email to can actually check the box that they've read the notice or your email. I would like to know how many people actually open their emails. Because I know DMF, they send these notices out, and quite often people don't read the email. So I was wondering if there's some way we could counterbalance that. That's all.
Ray, and Story might know better than me on this, but I do believe that we can pull metrics on any of our email blasts to see how many made the mailbox, how many were rejected as spam, how many, were opened, and so on and so forth. We don't routinely do that, but we could certainly, I believe that the program we use allows us to run those types of metrics.
Thank you, Jared. Thank you, Ben. Any questions for Ben?
Sorry,
Chris McGuire?
Mr. Chairman, it's Chris. Just one follow-up. Again, thinking about the conversation with enforcement. Ben, does the letter that you guys are going to send out, which I think is like more of a, welcoming regular anglers, does it also include anything about, penalties for doing the wrong thing? I know that the tone of that is hard to sort of mix in, but I'm just trying to think about how to, how to like make sure that we're reaching out to people with all the tools that we want.
Yeah, Chris, that's an excellent question. This is going to be the inaugural effort at doing this. It's not something we've done in the past, but sitting with my staff, we felt like it would be a good idea as we try and improve our communications moving forward. So I hadn't considered doing that. It would be a very tight line to walk in something where I'm trying to kind of improve the dialogue between DMF and stakeholders and get off on a foot of discussion to kind of go to the stick side of things. So I would personally lean towards doing something separately than this letter. But I'm happy to consider it if you have any thoughts on how to incorporate that, and we could certainly talk about it offline after this meeting.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It is like it's a very different tone. But I think it's a great idea to send out the letter that you're talking about. I really strongly support that. And I can only imagine there's a lot of people who are involved in enforcement actions who, you know, whether they know or don't know, are going to say, well, I didn't know, and I didn't know the penalties and all of that. And so I'm just trying to, you know, think about how to you know, blend that carrot and stick in the way that feels like not too, you know, onerous on people. So anyway, just throwing an idea out there. It might not be possible in this round, but
Yeah, Chris, I actually have a whole separate communications bit that we're hoping to roll out later in the year that I think that it would dovetail in very nicely. And as I develop that, perhaps I'll reach out to you to get your input on it.
yeah, happy to help if I can in any way.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris, and let's all remember, any idea is a good idea, you know, and let DMF run with it and see what they can come up with. But thank you very much, Chris. And you too, you and Ben will continue this offline, this discussion.
Yeah,
Chris?
roger that.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Chair, I'm not seeing any further hands raised. Would you like me to call the roll on the motion?
By all means, if there's no hands raised, everybody's comfortable.
Bill Amaru,
Yes.
Bill Doyle,
Yes.
Chris McGuire,
Yes.
Khalil Bogdan,
Yes.
Mike Peardnock,
Yes.
Shelley Edmondson,
Yes.
Suki Sawyer,
Yes.
Tim Brady. Tim Brady? Tim Brady. Motion passes with one abstention from Tim.
Thank you, Jared. Moving along. Good morning, Melanie. Matching federal recreational fishing limits for Gulf of Maine cod and haddock.
Melanie, do you want to speak to this? Or do you want
No,
me
you
to?
can go. Yeah, morning, Chair, and morning, Commission members. So I know I've given you an update on the federal rules that rule changes that were being recommended at a previous commission meeting. And so this is just our follow-up state process, and Jared can fill you in on what's being proposed here.
Sure. So last night we held a public hearing on adopting Gulf of Maine cod and haddock limits to complement the eventual final federal rules. You may have seen email from us late last week with an updated memo on this subject, reflecting the fact that NOAA Fisheries did publish in the Federal Register draft regulations to complement the council recommendation, and that is what you see in the table below, which is to increase the Gulf of Maine cod size limit from 22 to 23 inches, maintaining the season and bag limit, and to adopt the current for higher limits for all angler modes, which is a 15 fish bag limit and an 18-inch minimum size, rather than having the different size limit and bag limit for the private angler mode, which was in place last year. We anticipate that NOAA Fisheries will adopt their draft rule as a final rule in early June. However, they do have the discretion to amend their proposed rule based on public comment. Our recommendation to you today is to have the division adopt whatever it is that NOAA does adopt in that final rule as a complementary state rule. It's been our practice for a number of years to complement the federal rules because the fishery predominantly occurs in federal waters. Having complementary rules across jurisdictions enhances enforcement and compliance, and having uneven measures across jurisdictions can confound the MRIP data that's collected and used in the management of these recreational fisheries. So for those reasons, while we don't have exactly what the final rule will be set in stone, our recommendation is to complement whatever those final rules are once they are finalized.
But Jared, we have every expectation that what's on the board is going to be the final rule, right?
I have no reason to believe that what's on the board is not going to be the final rule.
And Melanie and Mike Peardenock, you guys see it the same way?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Yes. Thank you.
So I can take any questions, or Mr. Chair, do you want to Move for a motion?
Well, I have a question for Melanie about the Gulf of Maine haddock, the minimum size. Latest science, when is the first time, at what length do these haddocks spat?
Oh, Ray, you're gonna make me have to go back to a PDP memo that I don't have in front of me.
I'm sorry, I'm just curious. I noticed, because we did this with codfish many years ago. It was 21, then we bumped it down to 19, commercial.
Yeah.
And I was just curious, that's all. Thank you.
Yeah, we're definitely getting close with where it is now, but I'm happy to follow up. I can dig that up pretty quickly.
Thank you, Melanie. So Jared, you're looking for a motion?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Member,
Motion to approve, Mike P.
who's that,
Second.
Chris?
Motion to approve for Mike, second from Suki.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Suki. Roll call.
Are there questions and comments? Not seeing any. Bill Amaru?
Oh, gosh. I'm going to abstain. I can't believe that a 2-month season with one fish in the Gulf of Maine for all anglers is fair.
Bill Doyle?
Yes.
Chris McGuire?
Yes.
Khalil Bogdan?
Yes.
Mike Pearnock?
Yes.
Shelley Edmondson?
Yes.
Suki Sawyer?
Yes.
Tim Brady? Tim Brady. Motion passes with 2 abstentions.
Thank you, commission members. Thank you, Jared. We can move along here. Future public hearings. Prohibit the retention of oceanic white-tip sharks. Who's got this? Nicola?
Yes, I'll jump in here. So you have a very short memo on this item. This is not a species that is caught frequently at all in Massachusetts state waters, but our regulations include oceanic white-tip shark as a permitted species. Recently, the ASMFC's Coastal Sharks Management Board set a 0 retention limit for this species based on its status, and NOAA Fisheries rule to move it to their prohibited species list. So we are just letting you know at this meeting that we'll be adding this to the next round of public hearings, that will be looking to move oceanic white-tip shark from the prohibited species list, from the permitted species list to the prohibited species list. So no action is needed at this meeting.
Thank you, Nicola. Questions for Nicola?
Not seeing any questions, Mr. Chair.
Let's move along. Discussion items and program updates. Interstate Fisheries Management.
We have a PowerPoint on this about the ASMFC meeting outcome.
We do. I just need 1 second to pull it up.
Yeah.
All right. Dan, I think you're up first with American Lobster.
Thank you, Jared. So at the lobster board meeting, there was a few items discussed, and one was an interesting one. It had to do with the intersection of council and federal jurisdiction governing the sea scallop fishery with the ASMFC's interest with the lobster fishery. Specifically, there is an area on the northern edge of Georges Bank that some of the scallop interests have requested access to. And this is an area that's been closed for many years. And it is also the site seasonally of a large aggregation of egg-bearing females, large egg-bearing females. And so the technical committee of serving the Lobster Management Board has been doing its best to try to describe the incidence of lobsters in that fishery, or in the presence, and they had the opportunity to actually see some Coonamessett Farm data on some scallop catches in that region. And that was very helpful. So this is still a work in progress. There's some interest on the lobster side, not to open that area at all. There's obviously interest on the scallop side to open it. One outcome could be a seasonal opening, a time of year where there is minimal, reproductive females present. But at the, yet to be resolved is at the council level, just what would be proposed to be open. That's still a work in progress. So that spent a fair amount of time during our business meeting. The other another issue is a little more nuanced, but about 12 years ago, there was some proposals to reduce the Area 3. This is the offshore trip fisheries trap allocations and create new trap caps. NOAA Fisheries never executed those ASMFC plan addendum until they put out a proposed rule last year. And so much has changed in that fishery in terms of consolidation, and so much has changed in that fishery relative to trap cuts that have taken place that I actually made the motion at a previous meeting to pump the brakes and let us re-examine, the status of that Area 3 fishery and the Area 2 fishery in southern New England to make sure that the goals of those addendum, which were written, I think, in 2011, are still our current goals relative to reducing effort in that fishery, especially in the southern New England part of the range. The next issue, which is an interesting one, has to do with an issue that you folks voted on last month, and Suki brought it up at the beginning of the meeting. It has to do with our, in other states, adopting the rules for Addendum 27, which is the gauge increase in Area 1, the modifications to the Outer Cape V-notch and maximum size measures, and also the elimination of some of the extra trap tags that are issued for Area 1 and Area 3. Suffice to say that there are interests in Maine that are, and elsewhere, that are suggesting some kind of a pause take place on this, especially because the international trade issues haven't been resolved yet. I do expect to be attending a meeting in New Brunswick next month with the other state directors, trying to get the Canadians, especially in the Gulf of Maine, to come up with similar standards. This is an especially acute problem for the state of Maine. I don't know if folks are fully aware of it, but in between the U.S.-Canada border, there's something known as the gray zone, and I guess it's an unresolved area, and people haven't decided whether it's Maine or U.S. waters or Canadian waters. It's fished exclusively by some Maine commercial fishermen, alongside, of course, some Canadian fishermen, and they do have somewhat different rules because of like trap limits and things, but the potential for a differential gauge in that area, it was especially painful for many of the Maine fishermen. And then, of course, there's the interest on the part of the dealers that do import lobsters from Canada and process them here in the United States. And that's the focus of something called Addendum 30, which is another vote that the commission has yet to take. And that has to do with whether or not to recommend to the National Marine Fisheries Service to, abide by its current Magnuson standards, which says that the minimum size in the United States shall be the smallest minimum size of any of the United States lobster management areas. So there's a lot in play there. I'm still hopeful that we will be able to get the rules, be uniform across the jurisdictions and with Canada. That doesn't mean a complete gauge increase in all Canadian waters. I'm guessing it might just be in the Gulf of Maine portion, but it's my conversations with some of the Maine folks who came down to ASMFC, and there was about a dozen of them, and they took up about a half hour before the meeting start with a parade of testimony. Is as much as the gauge increase is painful, the differential with Canada, it makes it especially painful, and folks were kind of telling me that if we can resolve those U.S. Canada issues, then a lot of the industry can live with what was enacted. So, so that's what's been happening there. Finally, there was a lawsuit filed in Maine against the state of Maine by some industry groups regarding the trackers. That lawsuit has yet to be resolved. It was a request for a preliminary injunction, which was not issued by the court. And at this point, the board, on behalf of one of the main commissioners, has agreed to task the committee that investigated the trackers with looking into whether or not the trackers can be used in a fashion where the device does not emit all the time and only during fishing trips, for example. There are some who live on some of the islands in Maine who use their boats to go grocery shopping and do other things with it. It's a form of just family transportation, and they were finding it objectionable that the government would have be tracking their vessel at all times. So that's something else that the ASMFC working group is going to tackle. We're pretty hopeful that the tracker lawsuit won't prevail. To throw it out entirely, that tracker data is going to be extraordinarily valuable when we're dealing with things like that George's Bank story, right? If we can get the information with precise locations, it's going to be an amazing management tool for us to make those kind of decisions. Not to mention offshore wind. When the industry has really precise locations and can delineate the impacts to their fishing grounds and the displacement from their traditional fishing grounds, it's going to be just so valuable. And not to mention the much better data on where the lobster fishery takes place relative to where the protected species like right whales are. So I am personally optimistic that lawsuit will not prevail, but it may require some concessions on the part of the commission relative to that 24/7 pinging feature. So I'll stop there if anybody has any questions.
Yeah, my question to you, Dan, I know you've mentioned it to me. So what will happen is they'll have to pay for a different pinging package, which might be more costly, right?
I think so, Ray. Story's on. I don't know if you have a view of that or any idea how to respond to that.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I know that the committee's been tasked with looking into it, and they'll look into all the technical aspects of it. You got to remember there's 2 or 3 different approved devices out there, so each one might handle this a little bit differently. So I think we got to wait for that committee to come back after talking with the vendors.
Thank you, Story.
Yep.
Questions for the director?
Chris McGuire.
Chris, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dan, I wanted to go back to the Northern Edge question. I think folks know I chair the council's Habitat Advisory Panel, and we have a meeting early next week. I was curious, I noticed in the report out, and you just mentioned this briefly, it said that the egg-bearing females were largely on the bank in high numbers in the late summer and into fall. And I was curious if there's like actual dates that are proposed in the document that I should drill into, or if there's any more information about that timing, because I think that the idea of a seasonal closure is one that we should explore, and I just want to understand that a little better.
Yeah, Chris, Tracy Pugh is on the call, and she was the author, or I think the lead author of that report. Tracy, are you, can you answer that for Chris?
Tracy, you recognized.
Thanks.
Morning.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Thanks. I can try to answer that. I don't have it up in front of me, but yeah, so when we looked at the timing of when the lobsters were sort of most abundant, it was in the summer and late fall. I don't have exact dates on that just because of the resolution of the days that we have. So, if you look at that, and then if you were to I think the best way to try to balance out seasonality and avoiding conflicts with lobsters would be to try to avoid that summer into the fall time period. The winter and the spring is. Sorry, somebody told me that I'm being too quiet. So I think that timing wise, for avoiding lobsters, the lobsters are there in the summer into the fall. So that would be the timing that if I was going to make a recommendation that's specific to that, which we didn't really do that as a TC, but that avoiding that summer and fall timing would be preferable.
Thanks. And just as a follow-up, in the summary, it also says that moderate levels of fishing occur from July through November. So that's a little bit more specific on the dates. I mean, are those two things sort of aligned? You know, the fishing is happening when there are more lobsters there?
Yeah, and again, you kind of have to sprinkle a little bit of salt on the fishing data. It's reports from the industry which are good. The specific spatial resolution on those, we're not super comfortable with how fine that spatial resolution is. But the timing on that one, yeah, July through November, is pretty consistent with what we were seeing from the timing that we were able to pull out of any of the actual like lobster survey or lobster abundance data.
Okay, thanks. And is there just one last question, Tracy? So which of the ASMFC documents would be most useful for me to review before our meeting next week?
The report that the TC provided to the board, and if you don't have a copy of that, I can probably get you guys a copy of that.
Yeah, that would be great. If it wasn't too hard, if you have that at your fingertips, I would appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks.
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Chris. Jared, hands?
No other hands raised, Mr. Chair.
We're doing really well on time. Let's take a 10-minute break.
Okay.
Thank you, Ray.
Thank you.
We're back recording.
Welcome back, members of the Marine Fish Advisory Commission. So are we all done with questions on lobster?
I believe we're moving to striped bass.
Thank you, Jared.
I'll cover this, Mr. Chair. So the striped bass board meeting at the May meeting was largely about wrapping up the addendum 2 process, as well as setting the foundation for potential additional management action this fall and into the winter. At the last meeting, there was a couple states who had asked for a little leniency in terms of their implementation deadlines for addendum 2, which the board had not granted. So those states had to come back with revised implementation plans at this meeting. Those were approved. May 1 was also the implementation deadline for measures, and there's no non-compliance issues with addendum 2. So what's coming next for striped bass, the next major milestone really is the stock assessment, the 2024 stock assessment that is going to be presented to the board at the annual meeting in October in Annapolis. As a reminder, addendum 2 included a provision that says that if there's less than a 50% chance of rebuilding by the 2029 deadline, the board can act by specifications as opposed to an addendum process to change the measures in a more expedited fashion. So to help, prepare for that potential outcome, the board is forming a work group to concentrate on the issue of recreational release mortality with the, very conservative measures. And a lot of the mortality, the dominant source of mortality is the recreational release mortality. The board is looking to consider, additional types of measures that could be used to address that. So a work group is going to be formed to report back at the same annual meeting as the stock assessment is, that's going to look at, states that have current no targeting closures, as well as the EEZ closure and how that impacts catch and effort and angler behavior. They're going to be reviewing our recreational release mortality study and our citizen science results. Here's the slide shows 2 graphs with the type of data that we're collecting from anglers. And they'll be looking at any other reports that can help to inform any potential gear modifications to reduce recreational release mortality. They're also going to be identifying some kind of alternative runs that could be done in the stock assessment model to inform the board as to how much do you have to reduce recreational release mortality or recreational releases to have a appreciable impact on stock status. And then there's some interest to figure out how we could get some public input about these potential measures. Seeing as the board could act without an addendum and formal public hearings, there's interest to conduct a survey or some other type of scoping measures to help get public input that could inform the board on taking action if it feels the need to do so more quickly than the normal 6-month to a year-long addendum process. So that's where we are with striped bass. The other one more action item was on eel. On the next slide, there was 2 final actions on American eel. The first was to set Maine's glass eel quota at the status quo level. That quota was set to expire, so an action was needed to extend it. There had been some interest in Maine to increase it. There was some PDT concerns about increasing it, so that was continued at the current level. In addition, there was a second addendum on the yellow eel commercial cap that set a lower cap for yellow eel landings. This is a coastwide yellow eel cap. Massachusetts has very minor landings of yellow eel. Some of the mid-Atlantic states in general have larger landings. And the most recent stock assessment indicated a need to reduce the cap that was in place. So a new approach to setting that cap was adopted and a new quota level. On the figure here, it's that kind of dotted blue line in the middle was the option that was selected that set a new cap that is above the recent year landings, but below some of the 2015 to 2019 landings that you're seeing there. So when that cap is exceeded, it's only the states that have more than 1% of the landings that have to do something to reduce harvest. So this is not likely to impact Massachusetts directly. But it is interesting that our landings of yellow eels are continuing to decline. Part of that may just be due to underreporting. But in conversations with some of our staff, there's interest to consider what we can do to improve our reporting of yellow eel landings. And lastly, from the spring meeting, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that Mike Armstrong was the recipient of the Commission's 2024 Hart Award for his many scientific and management contributions to our Atlantic Coast fisheries. He's shown to be a leader at many of the board meetings, notably striped bass. He's a mentor to many of us, so I'm sure the Commission joins me in congratulating Mike on this achievement. And then lastly, I just wanted to give a quick update to the Commission on a deliverable from one of your prior meetings. You may recall that when we scoped when we did public hearings for our commercial summer flounder management this year, which includes the consecutive daily trip limit pilot program that allows trawlers to possess 2 days limits, provided each limit is caught on its own day. There was interest to expand that program to smooth dogfish as well as Gulf of Maine winter flounder to improve the efficiency of vessels participating in those species landings. The interstate plans for these two species are a little bit more restrictive as to trip limits. There's specific requirements about what the trip limits are, unlike summer flounder. So this requires us to put in a request to ASMFC. So we did that. We asked for their review and consideration of those requests by the summer meeting. I expect at this point that we're gonna hear back sooner than that with a likely approval. So they think they can just do those through some email ballots of the board. So we should be able to expand that that pilot program to include these species, provided the boards approve them this, by late summer probably. And I'm happy to take any questions about or Dan, to take any questions about the ASMFC ongoing proceedings.
Questions? for Nicola?
Khalil.
Khalil, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Jared. Concerns about both the striped bass and the eels. I'll go to striped bass first. I'm hearing that we have a strong spawning biomass, that the number of fish to keep the population going is not an issue, that we have that strong spawning biomass. I think, what has to be addressed, and the elephant in the room, are the abiotic and biotic factors which are affecting the actual threshold that's occurring, the low threshold. Has there been any discussion? And also we're seeing now for the first time in the Hudson River a poor threshold. Is there any discussion among the scientists? We talk about reductions and quotas and everything else, but are we going to be getting to a point where with biological reproduction, where something gets so low in a threshold that the species can't survive? Has there been any kind of discussion about the worst case scenarios?
Worst case scenarios. Well, I think the discussion clearly has been, and that, as you said to start out, was that the spawning stock biomass is sufficient to produce a average or above average year class. It's the environmental conditions, which are largely outside fisheries managers' ability to influence. So we're hopeful for a positive year. That doesn't mean that we can't ignore what's happening and continue business as usual. So, the board is looking at the largest source of mortality, the recreational release mortality, as the place to target the next efforts if the stock assessment shows that a reduction is necessary. There is on and off discussion either at the table or and off the table meetings about whether or not the target biomass level is possible to achieve in the current and future environmental conditions. So I expect that there may be interest to look at those reference points as we move forward as well.
Yeah, I don't want to get into doom and gloom, because we do have the science, scientists working on it and giving us figures, but the thing that concerns me the most is that it seems that it's business as usual, and we've had five terrible years, and we're hoping that we're going to have a good year. We keep on hoping we're going to have a good year, and if this trend continues as it is continuing, I really think that we might be having to look at some real drastic measures. And I'm not sure what we can do with the environmental conditions that are occurring. Low oxygen, the water's warm, low oxygen, siltation, fertilizer coming off the lands, the blue nose, the blue catfish, the steak nose, whatever that fish is called. interfering with the reproduction. I mean, it just seems that there's so many factors that are involved with the reproduction of this species that you could have the strongest biomass going for reproduction. And if we can't get those eggs to hatch and the fry to survive, it just seems like it's a spiral down that we're entering into. And I don't know any better way to say that, but I personally am very concerned about it, about the future of the species.
I think I would say that the board is as well. I wouldn't call this a business as usual type situation. There was an emergency action taken last year, as you know, to address an increase in unexpected increase in harvest. There's a addendum this year that puts in measures that are expected to achieve the target fishing mortality rate, which is a more conservative level based on the poor recruitment. So I just would
I'm sorry,
disagree with your calling it business as usual, but other than that, yes, yeah, we are certainly looking at a number of years of poor recruitment and brings a lot of uncertainty to the future.
Yeah, I would hate to think that the salvation of the species is going to be the name up in northern provinces. But thank you, Nicola. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Khalil. Questions for Nicola?
Bill Amaru?
Bill, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Jared. Thank you, Nicola. Nicola, I got a question. With recreational release being the major mortality creator, why is it that we never hear anything about the evolution of barbless hooks into the recreational sector fishery? That seems to me to be a no-brainer. I don't understand why there would be any objection over a period of a number of years, announcing the sunset, maybe 5 years in the future, of barbed hooks to be replaced by barbless hooks. Give everybody the opportunity to use up the inventories of their lures and hooks that they've got and transition into barbless hooks. Wouldn't that be a major impact, have a major impact on mortality?
I expect that the work group, the recreational release mortality work group, will be discussing that as well as other gear modifications.
Yeah, it just seems like an upfront major contributor. It could happen. I understand the economics and the cultural aspects of it's what I would, phrase it in terms of a sunset provision that would come into play over time. When you're using dates like 2029 in the future for other aspects of implementation, and that's far enough down the line. I think you could include that. But anyway, I'm glad that there is a group that'll be talking about it, and I hope it creates a little bit of momentum. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Questions for Nicola?
Mike Piernock?
Michael, you're recognized. Michael?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Nicola. Appreciate all your efforts and Dr. Armstrong's efforts over the years. There definitely has been proactive measures that have been implemented to try to address the status. I guess it kind of hit me that the fact that work group is being put together, that the day of reckoning is coming, with all indications that likely will be the case. Just to add to what Bill said, if we're going to go down that barbless road, then we need to look at different gear types, and that if one is with a fly fishing with a light tippet and a light drag and lets the fish run and then run out of gas and increases mortality versus other gear types, then maybe that's the road we need to go down, to look at whether, what's your drag setting, and what the mortality is associated with each type. I'm not saying to do that right now. I look forward to the stock assessment results coming out in October. I'm not one of those individuals that recently is saying that the reference point needs to be changed. I've been saying that for the past several years. I do not believe we're ever going to return to that reference point, and it's not achievable. So if that reference point was placed at the appropriate level to be representative of what's achievable, the outcome would be a lot different than what we're coming, what we have today. So any thoughts though about this work group? It sounds to me like bad news is a coming, the fact that they're creating it, or am I being premature with what I'm thinking right now?
Nicola?
I mean, the board is just trying to prepare for stock assessment results that aren't what we want to see. And addressing the major source of mortality. One of those tasks to the work group though is gonna look at, how much of a reduction in release mortality, if you can reduce release mortality from 9% to 7%, is that significant on the overall fishing mortality and rebuilding the stock? And try to take that into consideration and balancing as to the type of measures that would achieve that. So I think I would keep that in mind as to, what the outcomes and any potential recommendations could be from this work group.
Yeah, Ray, DMF is clearly in the lead on this, and I mean, I'm tempted to ask Ben to speak on it, but I think we might be getting ahead of ourselves because the work that Ben and Mike Armstrong and Mike and Bill Hoffman have been doing, we're trying to incorporate that now into a more informed conversation, and it's going to take a little bit of time. But I don't know, Ben, do you want to weigh in? I imagine you might, given how much time you've spent on this issue.
Ben?
I could, sorry, Ray. Thanks for recognizing me. I think I would just say a few basic things, which is we're examining a lot of these questions and it's happening in phases, which is really important to consider. I think that Mike did a great job of presenting to the ASMFC board a few weeks ago about our early work with the estimating post-release mortality off of different gear types, which we're in year 2 of that project now. And really the takeaway from that has been that double hooks and especially double trebles lead to the highest degrees of mortality. And it's really important to remember that, a barbless hook may help with unhooking time and fight time and unhooking time. Mike Peardnock, you mentioned drags and everything are certainly parts of the puzzle, but where hooks end up are a huge part of that puzzle. And I think that Micah presented some of these findings to the commission that, getting hit in the gills is nearly a death sentence for these fish. And so I think that that's what we're starting to see is, especially when you have double trebles, you get a lot more incidental damage to the gills just because there's that many points for the to interact with the gills. And, even a single treble is better than double hooks. Double hooks, really that second hook swinging around, even if it's 2 singles, are not good. So there are perhaps ways that, actions that can be taken regulatorily. However, I do want to just bring it around to a point that Nicola kind of alluded to, which is what is going to make a difference? Because, for a fly angler, if fly catch makes up 5% of the overall catch and release events or 10% of the catch and release events, it's not going to have a real big effect if you do anything with that, right? So we need to get an idea of how much effort is being done with each of these gear types, because if we're going to make a meaningful regulatory action, it's going to have to also be on a gear type that's used frequently. And if that doesn't make sense to people, I can try and explain it better. But those are just kind of the big points that as we move forward with this, I think are really important to keep in mind. Does that help, Dan?
Thank you, Ben. Yes, it does.
Thank Ben. Thank you.
Thank you. If I can ad lib for a second, when we went with circle hooks, I brought it to the table or to my mentors too late. I suggested a barbless hook. And another comment I'd like to address, we don't want to turn this into a gear user type conflict, because when you sit at the table at ASMFC, you deal with states up and down the coast. So I think, Ben, you addressed this well. You know, as managers, we don't want to be finger pointing at particular gear types. So I think Nicola's given a very good presentation or an update on what we're doing on the ASMFC level. And Ben, thank you for your thoughts. Please keep us in the loop, because all these commission members who take the time to be on these calls are very much concerned about striped bass. So I thank you for your work.
Ray, can I make one final point I should bring up?
Yes.
I'll be discussing this at the rec panel meeting next month, but I know only two of you will be there, are planning to be there at the moment, Mike Peardnock and Khalil Bogdan. But DMF has gotten funding to do a series of best handling practices videos that we're going to be producing with On the Water starting next month and should be coming out this year. So I think a big part of this, as we're all talking about, is education. And so we're really excited. We're teaming up with some really well-known people and a really professional shop in On the Water to make some videos that will hopefully have a lot of material as far as fishing advice and tactics to draw people in, and then also impart a lot of what we've learned from from our studies and other studies about the best handling practices to maximize post-release survival. So we are being very active about this and trying to take, you know, non-regulatory pathways to increasing post-release survival as well.
One suggestion, Ben, if you'd like more commission members in attendance, please send us an invite to that rec panel meeting.
I can absolutely, Ray, I can circulate that, and you know, always welcome to have more people there. I know Khalil and Mike are the MFAC representatives to the panel, but if other panel members or other MFAC members would like to be there, of course.
Well, from what I've learned over the years, the current commission we have, these members participate, and they may not be on the panel itself, but for them to be able to attend and listen in and question and understand the subject matter, I think it makes for a better commission when it comes time for meetings. Thank you.
That's a great point, Ray. This will be an in-person meeting in Westboro, but I will add the commission members to the invite.
Thank you, Ben. Okay, where are we at, Jared?
We're still here. Khalil has a follow-up.
Okay, Khalil, you're recognized. I'm sorry. You're recognized, Khalil.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Jared. You know, I applaud all the efforts to reduce mortality through all means possible. And you know, the thoughts that some of our members commission members just suggested and talked about. But my major concern is the threshold. We've had, you know, 5 bad years, and I think we really need to look closely at that. We can do everything that we want to try to reduce mortality. But unless we can somehow address the poor threshold, the reproduction that's actually taken place, the hatching of the egg, the survival of the fry, unless we can take care of some of those biotic and abiotic factors, and I don't know how we can do it with the global situation that is occurring. Just look around, look at how it's changed just over since last June. The unpredictability of rain that is occurring on a seems consistent manner and basis. And so I think that, you know, combined with, you know, thoughts about ways to fish and tackle and quotas and numbers, and yeah, it just seems like it's a daunting task that we're trying to address. But the real issue is that unless we can get that threshold, the reproductive threshold, above to where we need it to be, eventually down the line, we're going to get to a point where the species is not going to be able to survive. I mean, that's my feeling. That's my emotional feeling. And somehow we have to get a grip on this. Is that the Hudson now showed for the first time, I'm repeating myself, a poor reproduction, a poor threshold year, and and somehow we have to address that issue itself, whether it's, and I know going back to the 70s and 80s, Bob Pond, who won the Belding Award, who received the Belding Award. Bob Pond from Adam Laws helped, I think, turn around the blight that we had back in the 70s. And I'm not proposing what happened back then for us to try to bring the species back, but back then we were able to clean up some of the things that were happening in the breeding grounds at Chesapeake with the siltation and the fertilizers coming off the farmland. And I don't know what we can do about warmer water, therefore lower oxygen, but somehow all of these factors have to be brought into play when we're dealing with it. It's not just reducing mortality. And I'm rambling here, but it's a complicated issue, and I'm really concerned about it, just as are other people. And I think we're going to get to a point that we're really going to have to make some, I feel, in years to come, some really drastic measures if we really want to try to save this species of fish.
Well, Khalil, it is a daunting task, and DMF staff, God bless Mike Armstrong and his staff, Gary Nelson, Ben Gahagan, Nicola Meserve, everybody working on striped bass. And I'm going to give you, for instance, Maryland last year, I believe it was last year, they closed down the Chesapeake Bay for so many weeks, you know, when the water got too warm. You know, they just eliminated those days. If I'm not mistaken, Nicola, you can correct me. So once again, DMF leads the charge at the table, our DMF and their staff. And we have many other states to deal with on an ASMFC level. And everybody wants their piece of the pie. So God bless our DMF staff. Mike Armstrong's been a leader. He's well respected at the table, as is the rest of DMF staff. But we are trying to make moves, Khalil. And
I thank you. Yes, and I understand that, Mr. Chairman. And you are absolutely correct. There's none better than DMF and the staff and the folks that work for the benefit of the marine environment and for the fisheries manager. I feel from what I'm hearing, there's none better. So I'm not disparaging anything or anyone or regarding the DMF, really. But I'm just as an individual, as a commission member, as a citizen, as an angler, and as a scientist, I do have a little bit of a background in biology. I am, as are other people, I am overly concerned about this particular species and the eel also. Now, I was going to talk about the eel. How long can these species exist and continue the way they are when the conditions are not conducive to the reproduction? But I'll finish. Yeah, thank you so much for giving me the floor. I appreciate it.
thank you, Khalil. Any other hands, Jared?
No, Mr. Chair.
So we can move on.
We can.
Items. Recent adjudicatory hearings.
Yeah, give me a second. I'll get a couple slides here. I'll move quickly through. But it's been a while, I guess, since 2022, since I've given an update. So with a bunch of proceedings ending over the past month or so, I figured I'd give a quick update on what's gone on since 2022. Three matters up on the screen now were all related to violations of the lobster trap closure to protect right whales, coupled that came out of our gear removal efforts with MEP back in the winter of 2022. And in those gear removal efforts, these individuals were also found to have non-compliant buoy lines, both in terms of breaking strength, diameter, and buoy line marking. In some instances, there were also some buoy color violations. I resolved each of these through a settlement for multi-year suspensions. You'll see the top one was a 3-year suspension, and the other were 2-year suspensions, and that has to do with the sheer quantity of non-compliant gear that was encountered. The matter of Edwards dealt with violations of the trap gear closure in 2022 as well, although his gear was compliant except for the fact that it was in the closure. He had some issues that kept him from getting the gear out of the closure that were seemingly persistent. So that settlement resulted in a earlier closed season for this individual, moving that date back to December 1 to help him get the gear out of the water sooner. Unfortunately, to report, that didn't help any. And again, this winter we found his gear in the water, and we initiated a second proceeding on this individual, and he will be out of the fishery moving forward. Matter of Roach dealt with a lot of untagged traps and maximum trawl length violations in Lower Cape Cod Bay. This individual was the center of a pretty substantial gear conflict out in Sandwich Plymouth area. We immediately suspended the permit, and then this went to hearing, and it resulted in the revocation of that individual's coastal lobster permit. They still hold an offshore lobster permit that they've been fishing at Situate. Matter of Otis Reed. Otis was a multi-time shellfish violator. We worked with the town of Chatham to give him his permit back a couple years back on a kind of provisional basis, with kind of advocacy from the Chatham Shellfish Constable about this individual being in a better position to comply with the state shellfish rules. That was the case for several years, but it appears things might not be going well for them anymore. They were found fishing in a contaminated area and selling shellfish coming out of a contaminated area, for which in a town for which they did not hold a shellfish permit. And in responding to that, we immediately suspended the permit due to the public health issue, and then following a hearing, the permit was revoked. Matter of Furrow dealt with a substantial menhaden trip limit violations and the misreporting of catch and landings. We reached a settlement agreement for that individual to permanently leave the fishery, and authorizing a permit transfer to some family members of his that had financed his operation, provided he divested from the operation. Matter of Chapralis, this was a trap tag and trap limit violation that was going on in Lower Cape Cod Bay last season, and was producing some gear conflicts and user group conflicts down that way. We found that this individual had set traps with both his and his deceased father's trap tags in them, was fishing well in excess of the 800 trap limit, and when we initiated an immediate permit suspension, required him to haul his gear out. During that period that we authorized him to haul his gear out, it was found that he was actually stripping his gear and dumping it into Cape Cod Bay, removing the ground lines, removing the buoy lines, and dumping, single traps onto the bottom of Cape Cod Bay to avoid detection of the non-compliant gear. And MEP was able to haul up some of that gear. A lot of it remains derelict on the bottom of the ocean floor. Unfortunately, that individual has lost their permit. The father's permit, who was also involved in it, we've transferred over to the mother, but she has a reduced trap limit of 200 traps, and the son is not allowed to be on board the vessel when commercial fishing is occurring. Matter of Drake was a contaminated shellfish issue that we settled for a suspension and probationary period. Matter of VU dealt with abandoning fishing lobster gear, recreational lobster gear in the trap closure and the possession of egg-bearing lobsters. That individual did not attend their hearing, and their recreational lobster permit has been revoked. Matter of Perini dealt with the direct sale of aquaculture reared shellfish to restaurants and the misreporting of shellfish in sales. We spent a lot of time this winter getting this person on the right track in terms of their reporting and understanding primary purchase of shellfish issues and public health issues related to that. And we've recently are in the process of reinstating their permit with a pretty strict set of conditions on coordinating with our statistics program and our aquaculture program regarding reporting requirements. I mentioned the matter of Edwards. And then lastly, the matter of Nee. I reached an agreement with this individual earlier, late last week. This person has had some personal issues that has resulted in, minor but persistent violations of the trap gear closure. And the agreement I've reached with this individual is to have them off the water far sooner in the year. So as to this person, because they do work out of a small boat, not having the challenges of getting the gear out that they've faced in recent years. So I believe they have to be done fishing annually by October 31 for the next 3 years. So that's a review of what's been going on over the past few years. We've been keeping this, this program has been busy, and we do a lot of work to take actions on permits on some of the more egregious cases or on violations of regulations that we view as being particularly sensitive. So I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Jared. Questions for Jared?
Dan?
Yeah, Jared, I just want to give you a lot of credit for all the work that you do on this, and also to the environmental police who work closely with you to build these cases, and then finally to our statistics program, who more often than not assist all of us in trying to make sense of some of the infractions and getting a good understanding of the businesses that some of these folks sometimes are running. You working with the magistrate are very, very creative and efficient, and you all deserve a lot of credit for these successful outcomes.
Yeah, thanks for pointing out that this is a team effort too, because it does involve, the program staff to help, testify to and fill in understandings of why fisheries are managed the way they are, the policy staff to do the same, statistics program, permitting program to help kind of unravel some of these issues forensically. And then, of course, IVP to do the good work in the field to bring me these cases.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Jared. Any other questions for Jared on adjudicatory proceedings?
That looks like it's it. So
we can move along. Recent horseshoe crab stock assessment. Who's got
Derek,
that?
you should be able to share your screen. Let me know if you can't.
So Ray, as you know, at the last ASMFC meeting, we got a stock assessment update, and I thought it would be valuable for Derek, who's our member of the ASMFC technical committee, to give this commission, the piece of the overall assessment that is particularly germane to Massachusetts.
Thank you. Derek Perry.
All right, I think I'm gonna switch displays here. I think you're seeing the wrong one.
Yep.
All right, how about now?
You're good.
All right, sounds good. Thank you. So my name is Derek Perry. I'm a state crab biologist, and I also worked in this assessment here. I want to give you guys a Massachusetts-centric view of the stock assessment. So before I get into the 2024 assessment, I want to back up and talk about the previous assessment, give you guys some context about where we've been to see where we've gotten to. So the 2009 benchmark assessment used a terminal year of 2008, and the New England Northeast region was considered poor. The Mass Trawl Survey was showing a decline, as you can see on the left-hand side, those two figures. The spring and fall indices are both declining. It looked at all state waters. It didn't parse them out like we do now for north and south of Cape Cod. So because of those declining trends, Mass made some regulation changes. They cut the bait quota in half. The bait possession limit was cut by 60%. There's a bait permit moratorium, capping the number of bait permits available. And May and June lunar closures went into effect in 2010. Going to the 2013 update, the Northeast region was still considered poor. The assessment used a terminal year of 2012, and the Mass survey was still showing declines in the spring and fall surveys, as you can see on the left-hand side. So the Mass regulation changes included lunar closures that were extended through April, or half of April anyway, and a drag or trip limit that was cut by 50%. Moving to the 2019 benchmark, we saw things improve. The Northeast region went to neutral. The Mass region was doing pretty well, but Rhode Island was not, so they kind of offset each other. The terminal year of the assessment was 2017, and from this point on, the Massachusetts survey was split between north and south of Cape Cod, but only the survey south of Cape Cod in the fall was used. We can see in these figures that all periods of time in both regions are all increasing, especially that spring in southern New England. So moving to the 2024 assessment, it was the data workshop where states and other groups presented data and submitted data. The Stock Assessment Committee analyzed the data and wrote the report. That report was reviewed by the technical committee and approved and sent to the board for management use, which was approved about 3 weeks ago. So this is the group that worked on the report, the Stock Assessment Committee, the SAS. I was a member of that. I was not a member of the 2019 assessment, but I was for this one. Technical committee, you can see all the members there, represents every single state up and down the coast. So this is every single state and federal horseshoe crab biologist up and down the East Coast. So if you're looking for a document that gives an accurate representation of what's going on in the resource, I'd say this is the group to listen to. So for methods, there was 4 regions: the Northeast region, New York region, Delaware Bay, and Southeast regions. The Northeast region includes Rhode Island, Mass, New Hampshire, and Maine. In my opinion, this is a little too big. The crabs north of Cape Cod really have no bearing on the crabs south of Cape Cod. They should be split, and my hope is that for the next assessment, the next benchmark, it will be. For models, there was a REMA model, which is auto-regressive integrated moving average. It takes advantage of fisheries independent indices to determine stock status. Looks at the terminal year of a survey relative to the 1998 data point. I'll get a little bit more into that in a little bit. There's also a tagging model, which uses U.S. Fish and Wildlife tags to look at survival rates, as well as a CMSA model, which is a catch multiple survey analysis model, which does population estimates for the Delaware Bay region. We don't do that up in the north or south regions because we don't have enough data for that to run that model. So for data sources, there was commercial landings, both bait and biomedical. There's fisheries independent surveys. These were updated data sets from the 2019 assessment. For the Northeast region, we used the fall survey from DMF, south of Cape Cod, and the Rhode Island Trawl survey. We looked at other data sets, but they were not used because they're not used in the 2019 assessment. This was just an update, so it's basically fed it 5 more years of data. The terminal year of the 2024 assessment was 2022. So this is looking at coastwide bait landings by region. You can see it's declined over time since the late 1990s, early 2000s. It's been fairly consistent lately. We're in that Northeast region, and most of those landings are ours because Rhode Island, Maine, and New Hampshire really don't have much for landings. This is looking at coastwide biomedical. We can't really look at it by state, at least not publicly, because it's confidential. There's confidentiality laws that prevent us from releasing confidential data. So we can't do it by state because there's too few biomedical firms in the country. There's only 5. We're looking at males bled, females bled, unsexed bled, horseshoe crabs collected, horseshoe crabs bled, and total mortality. Total mortality is that orange line down there. In 2022, it was about 100,000 crabs were assumed dead from the biomedical process. That includes crabs observed dead before they were bled and a 15% assumed mortality rate after they're bled. So it has been increasing in the last few years, or several years. Looking at stock status, there's no current overfish or overfishing definition. Stock status is based on the results of the REMA model. Horseshoe crabs began being managed as a species by ASMC in 1998. So that 1998 data point is used as an index-based reference point. So basically the idea is, have things improved or gotten better or gotten worse since management started? It's based on a percentage of surveys with a greater than 50% probability of having a terminal year less than 1998 index-based reference point. If more than 66% of the surveys are below that reference point, it's considered poor. If 34 to 65% are below that reference point, it's considered neutral. If fewer than 33% of those surveys below that reference point, it's considered good. So the first index we're going to look at here is north of Cape Cod from the DMF trawl survey in the spring. This was not used in the assessment in 2019, nor was it used in this one because we only use the same data sources from the 2019 assessment. But you can see that it's increased more recently. This is the fall DMF survey for north of Cape Cod, really noisy. Again, this was not used in 2019 assessments, was not used in the 2024 either. But a very noisy survey. Looking at the spring survey for south of Cape Cod from the DMF trawl survey. This was not used in the assessment in 2019, so it was not used again. But again, you can see a pretty big incline there. The best years of the survey have occurred recently. This is a mass fall trawl survey, south of Cape Cod. This one was used in the 2019 assessment, and it was used again. See some high years fairly recently, but it's kind of come back down towards the median. Now switching over to the spawning survey. This is based on the geometric mean number of females per 25 square meters. This is the survey for north of Cape Cod, which uses a few stations: Duxbury, Millway, Indian Neck, Sanctuary Beach, and Great Island. Seeing a pretty slow but steady increase over time. This was not used in the assessment because it wasn't used in the 2019 assessment, and there's some survey criteria that prevents it from being used as far as survey design. Same thing for Outer Cape Cod. This is where most of the biomedical harvests come from. There's a 50-year time series of biomedical harvests from this region, and we're seeing an increase. South of Cape Cod, this is where most of our bait fishery occurs. Again, seeing an increase. This is from Warren's Landing and Swiss Beach. Most of that increase is being driven by Warren's Landing, not Swiss Beach. Swiss Beach actually is declining, but it's being offset by the increases at Warren's Landing. And we're grouped with Rhode Island in this region. So here's a Rhode Island survey. This is a Rhode Island trawl survey. That is showing a decline. It was used in less assessments, used in this assessment too. Now, this table kind of summarizes what we're seeing. The two different surveys that are used in the assessment. There's a 21% chance that the DMF survey is below the 25th percentile, and a 35% chance is below the 1998 reference point. So since it's below 50%, it's not considered poor. There's no trend since 2017. It's increasing since 2012. For the Rhode Island survey, there's a 67% chance it's below the 25th percentile of that survey, and a 96% chance it's below the 1998 reference point. It's declining both since 2017 and 2012. If you look regionally, the 2024 assessment is about the same as the 2019 as far as the neutral status. Our surveys are doing fairly well, Rhode Island's not, so they kind of offset each other for that neutral. In New York, it's still poor. 3 out of the 4 surveys are below that reference point, but it's a little bit of improvement because 4 of 4 were below that reference point in 2019. In Delaware Bay, there's been some improvement, went from neutral to good. Southeast, same thing. It's actually still good there. But we are seeing some declines in the Southeast where it's coming back down towards that 1998 threshold. So it's something to watch in the future. Coast-wide, we're seeing a bit of an increase. It's gone from neutral to good based on the number of surveys below the 1998 reference point. So things are looking a little bit better. Now going to the CMS SA model. Excuse me. This is based on surveys done in the Delaware Bay region, Virginia Tech Trawl Survey, New Jersey Ocean Trawl Survey, and Delaware Adult Trawl Survey. The y-axis is millions of females of horseshoe crabs. And this is looking at both with biomedical harvest and without biomedical harvest. Excuse me. So basically, because of confidentiality laws, we can't show how many crabs are harvested or captured in Delaware Bay itself. So basically what we did was we took all biomedical harvests and all mortality and applied it to Delaware Bay, the coast-wide mortality. And what you see here is estimates of population size with and without those biomedical mortality estimates. And those lines are right on top of each other. So basically what that's saying is there's no impact from biomedical harvest. And what we're seeing now is about over 15 million crabs of mature females in Delaware Bay. So that's basically tripled over time, the last 15 years. This is the same thing for mature males, millions of males on the y-axis, and that's basically quadrupled. You see a time period around 2010 or so where it's below 10 million crabs, and now we're over 40 million crabs in the estimate. And again, those biomedical and no biomedical lines are right on top of each other, showing there's really no impact in the population. Now going to the tagging estimates for survival. This is using U.S. Fish and Wildlife tags. Basically, you see here's a comparison between the benchmark from 2019 and the more recent update. You see in the update, most all those data points are below the 2019 estimates. So it looks like survival is lower than what it was in 2019, which we really can't figure out because it's not like there's more fishing mortality or anything else. So we're kind of at a loss for this a little bit and had to dig a little deeper. You also see those really wide confidence intervals where it's really not certain. So looking at the tagging data a little bit more closely, you can see that most of the recent years has been a lot less tags put out in the water. Excuse me. And that's largely due to COVID, it seems. There's a lot of spots like Delaware Bay where you can see that only 30 crabs were tagged in 2020. So there's been a huge reduction in effort for tagging crabs. We think that's leading to the uncertainty of these estimates. You can see that red box there, the 2009 to 2019 averages, and then next to that in that column, 2020 difference from average, and so on from year to year. There's been a pretty big reduction during those COVID years, which you think is leading to that variability. So the number of research recommendations that came from this assessment, this is just a partial list. One is to re-examine stock structure, especially in the Northeast region, given more recent genetic analysis and tagging data analysis. Also to compare density of horseshoe crabs near shore, offshore, and bays, and look at movements among embayments within regions. Based on that survey, do more surveys and tag more crabs. I also want to address the issue of gear saturation for spawning beach surveys and explore analysis that would be less sensitive to gear saturation. That's more of an issue in Delaware Bay where they have so many crabs, they have to unstack their crabs to get counts in the spawning survey. It's not really an issue we have here. We don't have that kind of density. But it's something we need to look at as far as how we can use these surveys to better estimate population size and trends. We want to explore the methodology and data collection of spawning surveys and the ability of these surveys to track abundance. We also want to continue to evaluate biomedically bled crabs mortality rates, consider a tagging study of biomedically bled horseshoe crabs to obtain relative survival and collaborations between researchers and biomedical facilities that result in peer-reviewed mortality estimates. There's been a bunch of papers that looked at mortality rates for biomedical crabs, but a lot of them use methods that are consistent with what the labs use. In fact, most of them would be illegal in the state for the methods that are used in those papers. So to summarize, stock stats in the Northeast remains neutral, Mass is improving, Rhode Island's not. Many of the surveys from Massachusetts that were not used in the assessment are also improving. Coast-wide stock status has improved from neutral to good. Status in Delaware Bay has improved from neutral to good. And population estimates have more than tripled over the last 15 years in Delaware Bay. Stock status in New York remains poor. Stock status in the Southeast remains good, but there is some caveats to that because there's some concern regarding recent declining trends in that region. Data gaps due to reduced sampling during COVID impacts the trends in fisheries independent indices and the tagging model, making some results uncertain. If anyone wants to see the stock assessment document, it can be found right there in that website. And I'll take any questions if you guys have them.
Questions for Derek?
Dan?
Dan?
Actually, I'd like, let's have Khalil go first.
Khalil, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Jared and Derek. Very comprehensive report. I really appreciate it. A lot of information. I'd appreciate it if this could be shared as other PowerPoints have been shared once the meeting is over. Be able to get this and look at it more closely. But could you go back to the coastwide biomed slide?
Yep.
Appreciate it. Yeah, that's it right there. We have the total mortality. Can you add that for 2022, for 21, that area? Can you tell me what percent mortality that would equate to for the biomed?
So basically what we see is that 50% estimate of mortality. So basically anything that's bled.
Derek, hold it. Could you speak a little slower because you're coming through muffled for some reason?
Sorry about that.
I can't understand everything you're saying. Go ahead.
So there's a 15% mortality estimate for any crab that's bled. That's assumed based on papers that have been published in the past. So in addition to that, there's also any crab that's observed dead during the process that's reported by the biomedical firms. That's added on top of that. So that's what that estimate is. In my opinion, that 15% is probably high based on our regulations and the methods that we see the biomedical firms use. I think a lot of the papers that were used to make that 15% are probably too high. They're doing things like keeping the crabs out of the water too long, and exposing them to temperature, all things that we have regulations for and have for a while. So in my opinion, that 15% is probably high, but that's what we use currently.
All right, so looking at this slide, what would that percent be for 2022, the mortality?
It's pretty close to 15%. It's just higher than 15.
Okay, so around 15%. Okay, thank you so much. Now another question, and I won't drag this out. When you have your coastwide mass spawning survey slide, you're talking about populations.
You don't want these?
Yeah. How do you collect the numbers to be able to put it into the statistical formula? How do you collect the number of?
So this is a volunteer-based.
You do it from quadrants or?
Yeah. So this is a volunteer-based survey. This is data that's sent to us from Mass Audubon and various other organizations. About half the survey is done by Mass Audubon. So they send us the data, and it's based on a density of number of crabs in a 5 by 5 meter quadrat. So that's basically how it's done. So it's looking at the density of those crabs inside those quadrats based on when those surveys are conducted, which is May and June during the new and full moons, 2 days prior to the moon, the day of the moon, and 2 days after the moon. Okay. And I only included data here that had at least a time series going back to 2012 and sites that completed at least 80% of their scheduled surveys.
Okay. All right. Perfect. That answers my question. Thank you so much.
No problem.
And Derek, if we could have this sent to us, emailed to us, I'd appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Khalil. Questions for Derek?
Dan, did you want to jump in now?
Yeah, so Ray, you know that down in Delaware Bay, there's a big summit that's being held this July of all the parties involved with horseshoe crab management. And I find it fascinating because of all the passion that we experienced during our recent rulemaking. We know that there's a constituency that is incredibly passionate and driven to protect these animals like almost nothing else that we experience other than whales. And this is going to be a summit where they're going to convene a lot of the NGOs, the stakeholders, the advocates for horseshoe crabs, the commercial fishermen, also the stock assessment folks. There seems to be kind of a disconnect where even though as Derek portrayed that the population of the population of crabs has nearly tripled in the Delaware Bay region, and the very sophisticated model is suggesting that there could be a level of female harvest. That's just not acceptable to the advocates, the horseshoe crab advocates. And as a result, the board, in the last go around continued to approve only a male harvest. So it's kind of a societal thing that and I wish I could attend that meeting this summer. Unfortunately, I was planning on being on vacation, but we should kind of keep an eye on that to sort of understand the flavor and then what comes out of that in terms of next steps, because I really think that we're living in a very parallel universe here. And many of the advocates for horseshoe crabs, are East Coast, and the arguments are very similar. So, I'm hopeful that the regulations that we enacted continue to, show positive signs. I believe they will. Derek showed increases that were occurring, 5 to 15 years after our lunar closures, and we think that this closure that we enacted is like the lunar closures on steroids. It's going to be extremely protective, and we're going to maximize whatever reproduction that we can. So I just want to point that out to the commission, that we can send you the information. I think there may even be a remote option for that, although not the ability to participate, but to maybe listen in to the discussions. But I just think that, we deal with fisheries, we deal with sustainability, but we also have to deal with constituent, expectations and stakeholder expectations. And I think that particular event is going to be a fascinating one.
So can I presume that you're sending Derek Perry to that? Dan?
Yeah, we're not part of the Delaware Basin. I've sort of suggested to Derek that we all keep an eye on it for the outcomes, but I don't know that we need to necessarily be in the room, but it's something to keep an eye on.
Thank you.
Bill Amaru?
Bill, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Derek. Very, very good report. Dan, I know you didn't mean to infer that advocates for horseshoe crabs are only from the environmental community, but for anybody who may have misconstrued that, you can be a commercial fisherman and be quite an advocate for horseshoe crabs as well. In fact, every single fisherman I know who fishes for horseshoe crabs is adamantly on board to protect the resource and continue his livelihood. The only other comment I would make is the assumed 15% mortality rate, as I've said, and everyone on the commission knows, runs contrary to my own observations over 2 years of returning crabs to the water alive. It's far in excess of what the reality shows. And my only statement is I'd like to know how, in a fishery that has, I don't know of any observed trips where crabs return to the water, 15% can be drawn upon other than just simply a shot in the dark between highs and lows of assumptions on mortality. Otherwise, pretty good. Thanks.
Bill, there are some differences in what you're seeing there and what those estimates are. Most of the estimates, when they do have these papers, are saying the crabs are dying a couple days after released. So what you see at the boat may not be representative of what they're seeing in the papers, but I would agree that it's less than 15%.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, that's always been my assumption as well. We found this out when we were tagging codfish. There's no question that some of what gets tagged and put back in the water and swims away doesn't survive. But until we have a thoroughly investigated effort to determine mortality, I just think 15% is a little bit higher. I as I said before in my observations, around 20 to 25 per 2,000 release, which is what we release per trip that we make, is closer to what we observe. And I'd say of the weaker ones that we put back in the water, maybe another 2 or 3% perhaps might not make it. But, I've been at sea a long time and I've observed the fish both scientifically and as a regular commercial fisherman. And those are my best assumptions. And they're not based on anything other than my own years of experience at sea. But otherwise, I'm very happy to see that the report is as optimistic and uplifting as it is for, especially for New England. And I'm sure that the industry, both biomedical and bait, will be pleased.
Thanks, Bill.
Questions, Eric, or comments?
I just want to mention to Bill that we can relate to your thinking on that. And in fact, we've put together a study design and a proposal to look at survival of biomedically bled crabs, and also survival of crabs taken by autotrol. And we put a price tag on it, a little over $200,000 with us doing most of the field work, but a lot of the expenses is buried in tags and receivers. We haven't been able to find the funding just yet, but it is ready to go. And I continue to work to see if we can find that. So I'm hopeful that we can get something going next year.
Thank you, Dan. I was aware that you were continuing to work on it, and I'm sure that in time we'll have the information we need.
In addition to that work that we're proposing to do, we're also doing a lot of monitoring of the biomedical firms at all stages. We're going on the boats during the collection trips. We're monitoring the pens. We're going to the labs, which we've been doing since 2000, and monitoring for mortality there. And we're also doing release trips and monitoring those release trips to see how many are dead at that point in time. So we have data for those stages.
Thank you, Derek. Any other comments or questions?
Shelley?
Shelley Edmondson, you're recognized.
Thanks, Ray. I just have a quick question for Derek, and maybe you went over this and I kind of missed it, but I see that some of our surveys were not used in the assessment, and I think it was because it needed the 2019.
You see work is coming around this side. Can you go clockwise?
Oops.
Sorry.
Oh, somebody's interfering with Shelley's conversation.
I took care of it.
I think because you were saying somehow that it needed something, protocols that was used in 2019 that were not used in this survey, the recent surveys. I just was kind of confused about, if we're doing these surveys, is there any way that our future ones will be able to be used in the assessments? And anyway, that's kind of a confusion that I have. If we're collecting this data and it's not being able to use in the assessment, are we all doing something wrong to not be able to see trends? Or are we using older surveys that, our newer surveys have improved, but we can't make comparisons because of the changes? I don't know if that quite makes sense, but there you go.
Yeah. So for the trawl surveys in the North and South Cape Cod issues, part of that was because I objected at the TC review level to the way it was being managed, where in the past they just looked at statewide Massachusetts. In my opinion, that's totally inappropriate, because the crabs north and south of Cape Cod are different genetically, different size of maturity, different exploitation rates. The tagging data doesn't show that they go back and forth. It's in my opinion, it's very inappropriate. So I kind of insisted that they break it at Cape Cod. So once they did that, they really didn't have a way of going back and doing the regions that late in the game. So they kind of just disregarded that north side part because the CVs are so high and things of that nature. So they kind of abandoned it at that point. For the spawning surveys, I don't think there's ever going to be a way, the way it's currently conducted, that can be used in a stock assessment, at least in the models. I think it should be in the document somewhere, as maybe like as an indicator, but not in the assessment models. That's partially based on where those surveys take place. A lot of them take place in parts where there's no fishing activity or there's closed areas. So I have an issue of using some of those surveys to be kind of used generally for areas where there are fishing, things like that. I don't think they're necessarily representative of the area, and that would be my concern.
Thanks. That helps me understand it. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Shelley. Thank you, Derek. Question, no Derek.
I'm
Jared,
not seeing any other hands raised, Mr. Chair. We can move on.
thank you, Derek, for your presentation. Hopefully we'll hear back from you after this season.
Sounds good, thanks.
Thank you, Derek. Moving on to other business, let's go around the table. We'll start with Mike Beardnock. Michael?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a few things. I recently attended the ICAT 2-day meetings earlier in the month in Miami, and the
Mike, you went muted.
Mike, you're not there.
hear me?
Mike?
Hello.
Hello. Last word we heard was Miami.
You there?
Yep.
Okay. All right, I'll try to make this quick. I attended meetings at ICAT in Miami and HMSCP down in Silver Springs the past few weeks, and there's significant discussion about DNA testing of bluefin tuna. And there's an ongoing study being conducted by Will Gillette of University of Maine, where he's had outreach to the commercial and recreational community to get fin clips. Get a fin clip of the fish you catch and release, or catch and retain. You submit that fin clip to him, and it's part of the DNA database, in which there's a robust 20,000 giants or commercial DNA samples, and there's 500 larval samples that have had DNA done on them, where that's where the close kin relationship is. But we don't have a robust recreational data set, and just throwing it out there to just get the public to be aware of that and the need for recreational samples. Me and others and other organizations and magazines and so on are getting the word out, and I forwarded this to Ben Gehagen, and hopefully maybe that could be distributed to provide additional details to the public. Last thing, I think many I know DMF's aware, many at the table are aware of the recreational bio project for cod. It's going well north of the 42 and south of the 42, with recording cod that are counted or released north of the 42, or cod while it was open south of the 42. So that's working well. It's been expanded though to winter flounder, and there's a number of participants working on that. And we had a recent tournament that Pete Santini has, a winter flounder tournament, in which the winter flounder that were caught came in, were measured, they were assessed whether they were male or female, and the data was taken to help the recreational data set. So I know that Matt Ayer was there and he helped with the process, but I just wanted to make people aware that was going on also. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Khalil?
I'm all set. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, Khalil. Suki Sawyer?
All set, all right. No issues.
Thank you, Suki. Tim Brady? Tim Brady?
Tim's no longer on the call.
Bill Doyle?
Hi, Ray. Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts I'd like to share pertaining to the striped bass fishery. The right to take striped bass, we don't have it. When I became a fisher, it was not, there was no participation in any of that fishery. There was none. And I think it became one of the first great success stories of fisheries management. When I walk around and I talk to people, I've come to the conclusion that there are people that care about fisheries management, people that don't care, and then there are people that say they care but really don't. And when we're talking about the recreational piece of the fishery and that the discard is a real problem, I see, we can identify people that are, taking striped bass illegally to feed a habit or whatnot. But I think the real problem lies with there's just an awful lot of people out there that don't follow any rules that the rules don't pertain to them, and they really have no idea of what they're doing to affect the fishery. And yet we have an enormous amount of recreational fishermen. And I'm not saying that the commercial end of it has no fault, but I fisheries management to me is always, the basic of it has been to make it work as you reduce the amount of effort towards that fishery. And I'm from listening to the discussion today and taking myself outside of this group and just looking in from the outside, it would seem to me that a logical conclusion would be that if we want to reduce the amount of bycatch that dies, we have to go to where the problem is. And I would give some serious thought about taking a look and limiting the amount of participation, the number of licenses, making some prerequisite to getting a license. I don't know, but something that would reduce this problem, because everyone in the room today, I guess I'm listening, we know where the problem is, but we need to do something about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Chris McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't really have any updates, just to share that building on what Mike Peardnock said, TNC has been helping to support those Rec Bio projects to not only get the cod project on the water, but also the winter flounder. And so, just glad that project is moving forward. And thanks to, Mike for his leadership on, really driving that into reality.
Thank you, Chris. Shelley Evanson.
Thanks, Ray. I have a little update on the channeled whelk fishery down here. I know we've talked in the past about obtaining some sex ratio data from catches this summer, and we're going to try to add that into the data collected by the Whelk Research Fleet Project, which is in collaboration with the Commercial Fisheries Research Foundation in Rhode Island. So we'll add a tab on their tablet to measure all the whelks, and I'll go out and sample them all and obtain some sex ratio data throughout the summer. So I know we've talked about wanting to see what the sex ratio is from released and harvested whelks. So we'll start to see how it's looking, and if this is an easy addition to the current data being collected by that research fleet.
Thank you, Shelley. Bill Amaru.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, just a quick word about the conditions down here on the Cape, what it's been like. The scallopers are waiting for a little shot in the arm. It's been pretty bare on the inshore grounds and even further out, but they're still getting by. As I mentioned earlier, squid fishery is in pretty rough shape. Not much showing up yet, but maybe today will be the beginning of a change. It did actually get to 65 degrees, which is why I'm going to be heading out to the garden to plant my tomatoes. Otherwise, I won't be with you at the CAT meeting in June. I'm sorry. That's going to be a great time, and be thinking about you guys when that date comes. Otherwise, everybody have a great late spring and early summer.
Thank you, Bill. Once again, a heartfelt thanks to DMF staff, commission members, and law enforcement. You make my job easy chairing these meetings. Great participation, and people are just enthused on this commission. The members are enthused, along with DMF staff. So thank you once again. I'm going to open this up to public comment. Jared?
All right, folks in the public, if you wish to make a comment, you can use the raise hand function. Once your hand's raised, that creates a queue, and I'll call on you based on order. Phil Coates, you're recognized, and you can unmute yourself. Bill, you're still muted.
Can you hear
Phil, if you
me?
wanna- Phil,
Yes.
hello, how you doing?
Saints preserve us. I finally got a chance to say a couple of things. They'll be very brief. This is a very interesting meeting. I was particularly interested in the commission's growing concern about striped bass, as I've been talking about for well over a year or so. I'm very concerned about these aren't storm clouds, they're tornado clouds. We are facing major changes. And I'm very concerned, this spawning stock biomass is wonderful. But it's being nipped away at by, look, a 10% quota in the commercial fishery was reduced to 5%. Wonderful. These are large spawning fish that produce a lot of eggs. And since we've eroded the other end and what's coming in, now we're starting to chop away what's left of the biomass, the so-called robust biomass, which I hope this year really gets a good spawn. All right, that's concern one. Secondly, as always, I'm gonna rant about the Massachusetts commercial bass fishery. Did you know that 50% of all the commercial permits issued are issued to, in quotes, striped bass fishermen? This is ridiculous. It's time to professionalize this fishery. And interestingly enough, I learned I had submitted a petition 3 years ago. And my casual reading of section 17A indicated that the director would review these petitions. And I thought it was a may option, but it's a shall. So I've yet, other than casual conversations, yet to hear a response to our petition to make the striped bass fishery far more professional, get rid of the riffraff, the people that sell extra or catch extra sized bass over their recreational permit, the people that write off expenses for their $300,000, $400,000 center consoles, and whatever other abuses are going on in this fishery. Last year, I think it was reported half the people didn't report any landings. I didn't report any landings last year for a number of reasons, and I have a bass permit, and I'm really skeptical about using it this year. But I have a grandson that's coming along, and he loves to fish, and we will bring back bass, I hope. So anyway, let's start dealing with this issue and stop talking about it. We got too many bass fishermen, if I can use the term loosely. It's time to bring that to an end. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Jared?
I'm not seeing any other hands raised, Mr. Chair.
Well, if nobody else from the public wants to comment or question, I need a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second,
Thank you, Khalil, and seconded by
Bill.
Bill. Thank you very much. This May meeting is formally adjourned. Thank you all.